Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming today to our legislative forum on the state of water infrastructure. Access to clean and safe water, as we all know, is a fundamental right, but in many communities across our state and quite frankly across the country, that access is threatened by aging and in many cases, crumbling water infrastructure. This forum was actually originally scheduled before the federal infrastructure bill was passed, which is a great start in working to solve this issue. The challenge, though, is that for generations, we have undervalued and underprioritized the need to really assess and invest in our water infrastructure. And so it looks like from the federal government, we're still kind of getting the exact numbers, but we should be getting about possibly more, but about $4 billion just for New York State for all types of water infrastructure, which is great. The challenge is that 10 years ago, with a study that was done in partnership between DOH and DEC, the estimated cost to fix all of New York's crumbling and aging water infrastructure at that time, 10 years ago, was $80 billion. So the federal infrastructure bill is an incredible start, and again, hopefully it will be more than what we're seeing now. There's still a lot to be worked out, but no matter what, it will just be the start, which is why we think it's really important to start to really understand the scope of this here so that we can start to make real plans moving forward on how to address this. In communities, again, that I represent and many people here on this panel, our infrastructure is over 200 years old. And water infrastructure, different types of it can last up to 25 years, up to 50 years, some even up to 100 years. But just this past summer, as an example, in the city of Albany, a wooden pipe was pulled out that was already 100 years over the lifespan of the 100 years it once lived. So we have a real issue here across the state. Can you imagine the high technology of wood piping that we still have having our water run through? It's really, really incredible. A stat too, just for reference, about across the country, there is a water main break about every 2 minutes. So this is something that is growing dramatically that we need to address. Outdated wastewater pipes also discharge billions of gallons of sewage into our lakes and rivers every year, causing extreme health challenges everywhere. While New York State still has tens of thousands of miles of lead pipes delivering drinking water to many of our communities. Frequent water main breaks shut down streets, disrupt water service to homes and businesses, and cause harmful bacteria to enter our drinking water. Today, we have assembled representatives from local government, labor, environmental groups, and professional associations to testify before us in the goal of identifying sustainable and long-term solutions to help municipalities across New York State rebuild and maintain their clean water supplies. Because we know that when these breaks happen in small towns and communities, the cost is astronomical. And many of these communities do not have the money to fix these emergency breakages, which means communities are left without access to clean water. And the fact is, too, just last month, voters across New York State overwhelmingly voted to enshrine in our Constitution the right to clean water. We now have an obligation at the state level to make sure that we can uphold that right and deliver clean water to everyone across our state. So today we are on a fact-finding mission to examine what has and hasn't worked up until now when it comes to getting the necessary funding to municipalities and small private water systems to repair our antiquated infrastructure. We will use this testimony from today's forum to draft a report detailing the foremost issues and practical solutions to inform future legislative, regulatory, and state budget actions moving forward. Joining me today on the dais are colleagues Senator May, Senator Gorin, Senator Borrello, Senator Jordan, and Senator Tedisco, and we will be joined by more of our colleagues as the morning moves forward. So with that, I would like to call up the first panel that we have, and that is Barbara Van Epps, Deputy Executive Director, New York Conference of Mayors, Ryan Grigori, Legislative Director, New York State Association of Counties, Sarah Ravenhall, Executive Director, New York State Association of County Health Officials, Richard Elder, New York State Conference of Environmental Health Directors, and Richard Berkeley, Executive Director, New York State Public Utility Law Project. Everyone will have about 5 minutes for testimony. Feel free not to read the full testimony that you've submitted. Everyone here has received that, but just for the sake of time. And then each senator will have about 10 minutes for question and answer within that time frame. So with that, Barbara, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Am I on? Okay, good. As the senator said, my name is Barbara Van Epps. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for the New York State Conference of Mayors, representing nearly 600 city and villages across the state of New York. I want to thank you, Senator Hinchey, and the rest of your colleagues here on the dais for organizing this forum and for allowing NICOM to participate in this very important dialogue about state funding for water and wastewater systems. Clearly, this is a major issue for local governments across New York State, as the state comptroller's data says that 939 local governments have water departments or water districts. So it's a far-reaching issue for many, many of our members, NYSEX members, and the Association of Towns. With respect to our membership, we have municipal water and wastewater systems that range in size from more than 9 million customers to ones as small as several dozen customers. But regardless of the size, it's clearly a most basic and essential service that we provide to our residents and to our businesses. And then I would argue each and every one of those residents and businesses takes advantage of or is impacted by every single day. So consequently, we really appreciate the increased emphasis that the state legislature has put on water and sewer waste systems and infrastructure, especially since 2017 with the establishment of the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. No one can argue that those investments have undoubtedly been important to many, many projects, many communities. But unfortunately, the need for those resources far, far exceeds the resources that are currently available. And as you said, Senator, that has been documented by the EPA, the Department of Health, and the Department of Environmental Conservation. There is a significant, significant need out there. And so consequently, the grant programs that have been funded through this, such as the WIA program and the intermunicipal grant programs, are significantly oversubscribed. And so what happens is what we hear from our mayors is that regardless of their need, and regardless of the efforts they go through to apply for these grants, they are not getting that money. And that money goes to communities that have emergencies. And unfortunately, it's what the emergencies we are trying to prevent. And we can't access those funds to prevent those emergencies. And so until that emergency arises, that's when you are able to access that grant funding. And as you said, some of these systems are 50 years old, 100 years old. And what we really need is that funding for the preventive maintenance, the continuous upgrades to keep us from having those emergencies, the water main breaks, the contamination, the failing systems. That's what we're trying to avoid. So it really is a vicious cycle. NICOM believes that the one way to break this cycle is to establish an annual funding stream, much like you have in your bill, Senator. It would give, this money would be available to any municipality that has a public water or sewer system or stormwater system, and that they would be able to supplement their investments in maintenance and upgrades and would help to avoid those more costly emergencies down the road. Some refer to this as a SWAP program. I like to refer to it as CHIPS for water and sewer. The idea of a formula-driven allocation for every community that has a sewer, water, or wastewater system would allow for the long-range planning, would allow for predictable budgeting, which I think is extremely important, and it would ensure that local officials have the ability to manage and invest in the replacement and rehabilitation of their systems. I also want to point out that what this would allow our members to do, and we've heard this from our mayors, they would be able to coordinate their water and sewer projects with their local road projects. So if you have CHIPS coming in and something similar to CHIPS for water and sewer, you're not paving a road one year and spending millions of dollars to do that, and then the following year having to dig up that road in order to address that infrastructure underneath it. And so that's one thing our mayors have really focused on, was the fact that they would be able to coordinate those efforts. The CHIPS program has been around for many, many years, and I think most would argue it's been very successful. I would also like to point out we had our legislative priorities meeting just this past Wednesday. We had 36 proposals that we presented to our membership, and this proposal, this CHIPS for water and sewer, was the second highest vote getter behind an increase in state aid, which should not surprise anyone. So clearly, this is very important to cities and villages across the state. We are happy to do whatever we can to help push this program. We have a survey that we worked on with some of Senator Hinchey's staff that we have sent out to every single one of our members, asking for information like how many customers you have, what's the age of your system, what's the system made of, what are your needs currently, both your long-term needs and your short-term needs. So we think that information will be very helpful in supporting this dialogue, and we will, as soon as that is available, we are planning on sharing that with all of you. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I am happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Next, Ryan.
Hi, Senator Hinchey. Okay. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this legislative forum on water infrastructure funding reform. My name is Ryan Gregoire. I am the Legislative Director for the Association of Counties. On behalf of our President, Marty Sauerbrei, and Executive Director, Steve McQuarrio, we appreciate the opportunity to share ideas and insights on how best to change the way New York State funds water infrastructure projects. I am also joined by two of my colleagues, Richard Elder, the Environmental Health Director for Rensselaer County, and Sarah Ravenhall, the Executive Director of the New York State Association of County Health Officials. In the testimony that follows, we will describe the role of local health departments and what they do to play in ensuring access to clean water, and elaborate on the top county priorities for water infrastructure funding reform. These include increasing Article 6 base grants and state aid to local health departments, increasing drinking water enhancement grants to LHDs, ensuring small systems receive funding, including privately owned public water supplies, or PWSs, and funding opportunities, funding the replacement of customer-owned portions of lead service lines, and funding the replacement of combined sewer systems. I would like to echo many of the comments that my colleague Barb Van Epps from NICOM just noted. This bill, too, is a priority of county governments. This is included in our 2022 legislative program. I want to thank Senator Tedisco for supporting this legislation in the past, and I want to thank Senator Hinchey for putting another renewed focus on this. This is a critical juncture in time. I think New York State has the ability to combine the resources that our federal government partners have provided with what we're doing here at the state level, and certainly this new CHIPS kind of formula for water infrastructure is what the counties believe is to be one of the best ways to fund increased attention towards improving our water infrastructure. So with that, I want to turn it over to Sarah Ravenhall from NYSHO.
Good morning, Senator Hinchey and honorable members of the Senate Standing Committee. On behalf of the 58 counties, local health departments in New York State, and Conference of Environmental Health Directors, thank you for the opportunity to share local health department and county government perspectives regarding water infrastructure funding reform in New York State. Our priorities for water infrastructure are outlined in our testimony document, and we thank you for taking the time to review them. The public health system in New York State is in crises. Numerous elements have intersected to weaken our public health response infrastructure to a point of unprecedented fragility. 10 consecutive years of disinvestment by the state, totaling more than $150 million in cuts, a demoralized public health system, the ongoing response to the COVID pandemic, and a specter of unanticipated wave of public health staff retirements that will further diminish our response and prevention capabilities. Over the past several years, the number of staff delivering Article 6 core services has declined. According to data from the state, the number of FTEs working on Article 6 services declined by 7% between 2015 and 20. During the same period, the population of the state actually increased by 3%, and the breadth of the mission of the local health departments exploded due to the pandemic. This reduction in staff has made it harder for New York's local health departments to address the public health challenges facing their communities. According to the Public Health Center for Innovations and the Jabomod Foundation, local health departments nationally need about 54,000 new staff to be able to provide adequate infrastructure and a minimum package of public health services, which includes water quality oversight, monitoring, and technical assistance to assure public water supply operations. We must meet that need in New York State. While full-service local health departments are responsible for activities aimed to assure compliance with all state and federal law and regulation, communication with the public, and data surveillance, it's the combined role of both the local governments, the local health departments, and the public water systems that keeps water safe for consumption and use. Public water systems have primary responsibilities for daily operation, maintenance, and monitoring of the drinking water they provide to communities. We urge the legislature to identify funding to support current and future water infrastructure reform activities to assure localities, local health departments, and public water systems alike have the resources needed, including skilled staff that are needed to conduct these activities and escalate water quality violations. Your leadership and support has never been needed more during this time to protect the lives of the people of New York. NYSHO thanks the legislature for its ongoing leadership on this public health issue. We're committed to working with you to identify the resources needed to move your efforts forward. I'm elated to be joined here today by one of the state's lead environmental health experts, Richard Elder, Director of Environmental Health in Rensselaer County. And when it comes time for questions and answers, he'll really be able to answer some of the more technical questions that you have. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yes. Good morning, Senators. Thank you for having the Public Utility Law Project here this morning, and thank you especially, Senator Hinchey, for this invitation. My name is Richard Berkeley. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Utility Law Project of New York. We're a 40-year-old not-for-profit which has the unique mission in the state of New York of educating, advocating, and litigating on behalf of low and fixed income utility consumers. I appreciate the opportunity to provide public comment today in relation to small privately owned water companies in New York and their struggle, some might say inability, to provide safe and reliable and adequate and affordable water service to their customers across New York State. If you look at the Department of Public Service website, that of the state regulator, you can see that there are approximately 230 small private water companies operating across the state of New York. These small private water companies serve about 830,000 households, and just to clarify, not customers, households, so multiply that number by 3, so a little more than 2 million individuals. If you look at those companies one by one, you'll see that some of them serve 20 or less households, and most others no more than 100 households. For many years, the Department of Public Service has been aware that the financial reality of operating these small water systems makes it difficult, if not impossible, for them to provide safe and adequate drinking water at just, reasonable, and affordable rates. Financial distress has been and continues to be a considerable challenge for these small systems to meet current state and federal clean water standards, and this will only become more difficult as the state of New York and the federal government continue to strengthen those protective statutes. In the worst cases, like Hoosick Falls, Love Canal, Newburgh, and other places in New York, incursion of forever chemicals, carcinogens, and other toxic substances into drinking water systems have led to environmental catastrophe with disastrous impacts on residents. In lesser cases, the Department of Public Service has documented numerous consumer complaints about poor water quality, interruptions in service, inadequate water pressure, subpar customer service, and inconsistent billing practices. Municipal water departments and water districts can fund infrastructure maintenance, improvements, and expansion through property taxes, assessments, and fees for usage. As government entities, there are also several different federal and state funding initiatives that can defray the costs of their investment in infrastructure, although, as we all know, those funds are insufficient. But none of those opportunities are available to private water companies, which often, as a result, pursue and are given huge increases in rates to fund necessary capital projects. In 1994, 3 decades ago, the Department of Public Service issued a set of guidelines for dealing with the problem of small water companies in New York. And the guidelines were very simply to incentivize larger companies to buy smaller ones, with the idea that that would stabilize their finances and make it possible to comply with safe drinking water law and state regulation without massive annual rate increases. The document in question, 93W0962, is still the state's policy for dealing with the fiscal crisis of small water companies 30 years later, and it was included with my hard copy that I sent to the committee earlier. Let me briefly quote from this 30-year-old document that set forth the policy towards small water companies. Small water companies typically cannot attract capital and often have small cash reserves or none at all. Frequently, these companies are run by part-time managers with little technical training. In addition, their small customer base limits their ability to incur significant expenditures for regulatory compliance, water safety, and other purposes. As a result, these small companies frequently fail to comply with new or existing health and safety regulations. And 30 years ago, the state's regulators said, in particular, the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act are expected to impose requirements that many systems will be able to meet. Consolidation is therefore a solution in these situations. But as we know, consolidation is not without its own problems, as the state's experience with its 2 large private water suppliers, like the Suez Water Company, a global water company, and American Water Company, a national water corporation, have shown. Together, those 2 systems service 1 million households on Long Island, Rockland, and Westchester counties, and throughout the Hudson Valley, all the way up to Kingston. According to a 2017 report by the state comptroller, the customers of Suez and American Water paid 2 to 3 times more on average for their service to receive water than those who receive water from a municipal system or a public authority. That level of cost is unaffordable and adds financial stress to fixed income and low-income households. But to put this in perspective, Senators, American Water and Suez usually only seek and receive double-digit rate increases, only double-digit rate increases when they request increases. The small water companies, on the other hand, almost never get less than high double-digit increases and often get triple-digit increases annually in the cost of water for their customers. I point out here also, by the way, that those small companies are not required to undergo full audits until and unless they are purchased in a consolidation. But it is obvious that even those huge increases are not sufficient to meet those companies' needs for funding necessary to maintain water safety, adequacy, and the proper operation of their systems. Thus, there is a continuing spiral of underinvestment and over-increases of the costs. The affordability crisis in water got so bad on Long Island that a pathway to public takeover of the American water system was approved by Governor Hochul. Recently in Rockland County, the county legislature approved a study for a pathway to takeover of the Suez Water Company. In other words, the 2 largest water companies in New York are facing potential public takeovers. In the Hudson Valley Water Company system, and I'll pick one example of a small company, consumers are also considering taking over the system or simply abandoning that system and drilling their own wells despite the high cost and the problems that it will cause for the people who remain on the system. Municipalities and New Yorkers generally do not contemplate taking over public utilities lightly, and they do not lightly contemplate buying the problems that they have complained about for decades. So why is this happening? The simple answer is there is a crisis affecting small private water companies in New York. It is a crisis that is at least 3 decades old, and despite the Department of Public Service and the Public Service Commission's efforts to promote a private sector solution, it is not working. I think it is time to examine if government can step in and end this crisis or at least show a pathway to success. And one last option as to why giving a government option a try. New York's water system need tens of billions of dollars of investment to be upgraded and to be made safe and adequate and be able to provide service at just and reasonable rates. Yet, Despite the billions of dollars New York will receive from the American Infrastructure Act, none of it will go to privately owned systems. In New York, only government-owned systems access that money through zero or low-interest loans or through grants. Private companies must increase their prices or borrow money to make the upgrades they must construct to guarantee safe and clean water. And as we have seen since the 1990s, despite the need that has been shown across the state for millions of New Yorkers, that will not happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of your testimony today. My first question is, specifically I think for NICOM and NISAC, when your members apply for the grant program, when they're looking to do that, what percentage, and they have projects, what percentage of the money that they get from the grant program typically covers the project need?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So when we're talking about the county health departments, we're talking about the 36 full-service local health departments that provide environmental health services. And for water quality projects, they are drawing from that drinking water enhancement grant. Those grants that they receive have been reduced significantly over time and flat funded, despite the number of new projects that they're taking on. But those grants actually allow them 100% to hire staff and do the work. They're just not large enough to cover all of the projects that they have to do. Now, when they finish using all the funds in those grants, after that, they can actually tap into Article 6, which covers 36 cents on the dollar after that. But Rich in Rensselaer has some pretty good examples of how his county uses that funding, the drinking water enhancement grant.
So in Rensselaer County, and we're considered a medium-sized county in reference to water systems, we have about 175 active public water supplies that we oversee and regulate. Of them, 54 are community water systems, 17 of which are municipal-owned. The rest are privately owned. We have 15 non-transient systems. Those are schools or large businesses with large numbers of employers on private wells. And then 106 non-community systems. These are your smaller systems, restaurants, things like such. Out of the drinking water enhancement grant that Rensselaer County receives, we receive about $131,000 annually to manage our drinking water program. 123 of that is tied to personnel costs, which leaves about $8,000 left of that grant towards equipment, sampling equipment costs, laboratory costs for water analysis and such. Out of that $8,000, we then take every inspection, so we try to do an inspection, staff availability. We like to inspect every one of our water systems at least once per year. At every inspection, we take at least a basic water sample, which costs about $40. So out of that $8,000, right off the top, $7,000 of that is tied to that surveillance sample. So by the time we get to just doing the water program, really we have $1,000 left, which doesn't cover any kind of special instances that come up. It doesn't carry over for emergency things. For instance, the current PFOA issue that we're dealing with in the town of Postenkill, the county at this point has expended $50,000 in lab fees alone in trying to identify contaminated wells and working with the state to get residents on treated water systems that are affected by that spill.
And this is why, when you look at our testimony, there's an Article 6 ask really tied into it, because we're talking about the public health workforce in the state and the crisis that they're undergoing. I know in Rensselaer, Rich had mentioned he has 5 staff working on water quality in his department for the entire county of Rensselaer. And, the challenge is the way that Article 6 is structured right now. Makes it very difficult for the counties to hire the real local experts that are needed to do the work. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, these folks were fully engaged in pandemic response activities, working and supporting businesses, doing contact tracing, things that they had never, ever done before. So we really need to support and expand our public health infrastructure in the state.
And if I can, Sarah, I think it's important that 5 staff, I would love to say that 5 staff is water. That 5 staff is what we call community SAN. So besides overseeing these 175 water systems, that same 5 staff is the staff that is responsible for inspecting every food service in the county, every public swimming pool in the county, every hotel, motel, restaurant, migrant farm in the county. So it's not just that 5 people do that. Those 5 people have about 3,500 operations that we oversee.
Want me to jump in? I don't want to belabor the point, but I think in terms of our members, it really depends on, obviously, the size of the project, but also which grant they apply for, because some of that is dictated by the grant programs themselves, how much reimbursement you can get, how much that grant is going to fund. So I think it really does vary. If it's a WIA grant, it's one percentage. If it's a quality improvement grant, it's a different percentage. And there's also a cap on the funding that they are able to receive. So it really varies depending on the size of the project that you're talking about. I will say, I do think they increased some of those caps in the last, 6 months or so, which is good news for our municipalities that have those larger projects, because hopefully they will be able to secure more of that funding for those projects.
Thank you. But I want to come back to that if I have time, but I want to ask a question to you. Can you talk about what courses of actions towns or people have if they're on a small water if they're kind of tied to a small water company and that small water company isn't adhering to standards or public comment? What kind of courses of action do the people have or the towns have to make sure they do?
Sure, thank you, Senator. There are a couple of things that they can do. First, initially, they can contact the Department of Public Service, and for issues that are related to inadequacy of the water and poor customer treatment, the Department of Public Service regulates those portions of local water. If it's an issue of water quality or water safety, they have to go to both the State Department of Health, DEC, and also to the County Department of Health. If they want to take definitive action, if they've done this over and over, which many small municipalities have, frequently they call us and ask us to help them. And what we then do is suggest that they trigger an investigation by the state entities in charge and to look at the status of the system and then to figure out what next steps they should take. One of the steps that some parts of the state have taken is to create intermunicipal water systems and municipalize the small water and move it into a multi-municipality system or into a county system. We think that's worked in some places, but the scope of the problem is too big for that right now.
And what's the cost on doing something like that too for the places that do?
That's a very good question, and it really depends upon how large the problems are with the individual water systems. I can tell you, because there's a much larger market in the cellular telephone or internet service industry, that they pay about $5,000 a customer. I expect it's much more with water, but the first thing we always suggest is bring a forensic accountant in, study every book that the company has filed for the last decade, force the Public Service Commission to audit the company too at the same time, and then you'll get a sense of how much it will cost. One of the good things about moving it into a municipal system is if the water system is not seriously problematic and it's merely the inability of the current owner and operator to operate it properly, it might not be that expensive and it can be reasonably paid for over a period of time through bonding, or if the state creates some kind of a revolving loan fund to do something like that. But this is going to be a very much factual, case-by-case basis analysis.
Thank you. And with my last minute, do either NICOM or NISAC have a sense of the scope that your members are dealing with when it comes to cost for both maintenance and upgrades and kind of expected breaks that are going to come? Do you have even on average, or understanding what that would look like?
So I hope we will in a few weeks that we can share with you, because that is definitely one of the questions we asked our members to respond to in this survey that we sent out. So that, we want long-term, short-term, what are the needs out there that we're trying, because there's all these reports out there, as you mentioned, but they're dated, and we're just trying to get a handle on that. So I don't have that information right now, but I hope to have it very soon.
And we can do the same, Senator. We can survey our members for that. I would just stress that I think, I want to go back to a comment that Barb made early in her testimony, which is this vehicle and this legislation would streamline this whole process for municipalities, for counties to apply for this funding. We would be able to get money out the door faster to work on these projects. We could combine it with road infrastructure projects we're doing. On average, a county is, like a medium-sized county like Rensselaer, is spending about $5 million a year in upgrading their roads. So theoretically, this funding could be used to also overhaul water lines and infrastructure that's underneath those roads. So I did just want to stress that. And the other side for counties, in addition to infrastructure, is the importance of making investments on the operating side, which is making sure that our environmental health departments have the staff and the resources they need to be able to safely inspect and manage our systems.
Thank you very much. And with that, I want to recognize we've been joined by our colleague, Senator Harkam. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And I'm going to turn it over for the next question to Senator Gordon.
Thank you, Senator Henchy, and thank you for putting this very important meeting together. I represent a district on Long Island. Was my mic on? Okay. I represented a district on Long Island, and as you may know, Long Island is, I guess, probably unique to the state in that 100% of our water comes from a sole source aquifer. We have an elaborate system, it's all under the ground. So everything that above ground eventually gets into our drinking water supply potentially. And now we're dealing with legacy contaminants of 50, 60 years ago, where we were building airplanes to fight World War II, and where there were farms that now have subdivisions. So one of the issues that we have is that we really have to extremely limit any new development and redevelopment, particularly economic development projects, affordable housing projects. In Suffolk County, for example, our sanitary code forbids development in much of the island, even where the zoning would permit new development because of this discharge problem. And the only solution is to build new sewage systems, which, as you know, are very expensive. So I guess my question is, we also have the issue of infrastructure to maintain the existing and the cost, but what do your, I guess for counties and NICOM, what do you hear from your members in terms of the new infrastructure that they need for, brand new type of systems versus just maintaining the old, and how they balance it?
I think from what I've heard from our members is it's a little bit of a mixture, Senator. It's a great question. I think it depends on the area. So for example, in some of our upstate communities that have older infrastructure in place, they're looking at just being able to replace old lines, and they are tied to economic development projects as well.
Right.
Some of these systems are completely intricate, and the counties upstate believe that by improving this water infrastructure, then in turn helps with economic development. They go hand in hand. So it does really depend on the situation. We do have a county upstate that has just had to construct a new jail facility. They're looking to try and tie in a new water line into that system so they can spin off economic development projects around that facility. So there's an economic development component to it, but certainly it really depends on the individual community. I don't know, Barb or Sarah, if you have anything else you wanted to add there.
Yeah, I think the same is true for our members. It really varies by what's happening across the state. I know there have been some communities that have benefited from these grants and have been able to undertake those upgrades. The rest of those communities that haven't been able to access this money, it's been a little bit of whack-a-mole. They try to address the emergencies as they come up, but because there isn't that steady stream of funding, it's hard to just go ahead and do those upgrades unless you're getting something from the state. Now, the ARPA funding will hopefully be helpful because, as you know, they can use that money for water and sewer. But we also have to keep in mind that ARPA money is a one-shot. And what we really need is the ability to have resources coming in that we can plan for, that we can budget, and then we can address some of those longer-term issues by saying, okay, this year we're gonna do this, we're gonna take care of this section. Next year, we're gonna take care of these lines. There's so much benefit to being able to plan for those resources and take things in piecemeal format instead of just trying to put out fires when they occur.
You write anything of this scope without grant money, it's just virtually impossible to be done. Mr. Berkeley, I appreciate you raising the issue of private water. I sponsored one of the bills to create a new water authority, a North Shore Nassau Water Authority, as part of the American water system, and we're grateful to Governor Hochul for just recently signing it. And I also used to chair, before I came here, the Suffolk County Water Authority, which was one of the nation's larger systems, and I can just tell you, anytime we incorporated a smaller municipal system, that system saved money, but even more importantly, they avoided a lot of future costs because of, as you know, the emerging contaminants and the new state standards are, rising costs as well. But one of the issues that we're now grappling with in terms of when you take over a private system is you have to buy it. You have to buy the infrastructure, you have to bond it. Hopefully there'll be some grant money to help do that. The governor's consolidation fund is being accessed here. But how would you suggest municipalities and entities deal with that issue of the cost of buying the infrastructure of a private company?
Thank you for that question. And Long Island, of course, is, as you say, a unique area of the state, and so the options that are available in other parts of the state are not as readily available to you. For Long Island, the thing to do is to take all reasonable efforts of due diligence to drive the price of the acquisition down. Frequently, when you buy a corporate entity, there is a allocation to goodwill. It is arguable that there is no goodwill anymore on Long Island for the American Water Company. Bringing in forensic accountants to study every inch of operation of the company and go back as far as you can to find out what money was misspent, what money was wasted. All those things are necessary to drive the cost down. As far as bonding it is unfortunately the only thing that you can do to keep the prices reasonable on a going forward basis in your municipalities and on the island. But I think if you can get additional assistance from the state of New York, either by laying off some of the bonds through a state financing entity in a manner similar to what the Long Island Lighting Company did when it became LIPA, although with a somewhat better operation than the first round. I think those are pretty much the only things you can do on Long Island. In other parts of the state, you can consolidate as many of the small private companies into one basket and get economies of scale, in addition to having a better run and a larger with better access to capital entity running them, which lowers the costs. But I think, unfortunately, for Long Island, the way forward is going to be difficult and take a lot of work. I wish I could say something better
No,
and
that's
easier.
very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Harkam.
Thank you very much, Senator Hinchey. This is a great hearing. Thank you for bringing us all together. Thank you all for your testimony. It's very enlightening and important stuff. I want to go back to what Senator Gorham was talking about, where we have no infrastructure. And my district is kind of a microcosm of a lot of areas of the state where towns, villages, and hamlets are on failing septic systems. We have no municipal water. They're private wells, often contaminated with either nitrates or sodium. And the old failing septic systems are putting phosphorus into our water supplies, on and on and on with the issues. The revolving loan fund that we have is really not very useful to our municipalities because many of them could actually go out and bond at the same rate. And so we've had instances in our district where plans have been worked on for years, and then when it comes time to vote on the district to create the district, the vote fails because the price per household is just too exorbitant. So what recommendations would you have action we can take to reform a system where there is literally no infrastructure, whether we're building local sewer district, local water district, to give aid to our municipalities beyond the revolving loan system, which really is not effective for them.
I wish I had an answer. I'll let Ryan take this one.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question, Senator Harcum. You know, I think we could go back and brainstorm with our colleagues at AOT as well on this, to see if the Association of Towns had some ideas here. But, you know, I think in part, and maybe this isn't directly going to give you an answer on this, but I think in part, this bill sets up a system where a county can put in their capital budgets, okay, here's what we need to do. They can map out the next 5 years. There's some certainty with it, just as the CHIPS program for roads is, which works very, very well. This, what I'm calling CHIPS for water as well, would then allow counties and other municipalities plan for situations like in your Senate district where, okay, do we need to take a look at how all of these, you know, bifurcated systems are set up and combine efforts, or, you know, maybe there's two different towns that need to merge together or whatever, what have you. I think this legislation goes a long way in helping to assist the municipalities and counties in planning for what that will look like. I don't know, Sarah, if you have anything else you wanted to add specific, or Rich, from your perspective in Rensselaer.
No, I agree. We have a number of communities done the same thing. They've looked at bringing water in for water needs or sewer in for sewer needs. And again, at the end of the day, the cost is just too high to develop a new system. I'll go back to, though, the previous senator comment with the expansion of water systems and infrastructure for economic development, and that's great, and we see a lot of that. The challenges we start running into with the aging infrastructure is we can get the water out for the new development, but we have to have the infrastructure inside. Some of that older infrastructure, which gets the water there, becomes now the holding point. You know, whether we have to upgrade storage tanks that are 60, 70 years old and they're not large enough to handle the additional flows, the raw water transmission mains to get the water to the treatment plant, or the upgrades of those treatment plants themselves to get that water out to those areas that need new infrastructure. So while we want to build out water systems, and obviously from a public health point of view, we always love the expansion of public water and public sewer into communities, it's coming back to we got to fix the house before we can build on to the addition.
And I'd like to add two very simple thoughts, although I think that the problem is larger than the two suggestions I would give you, Senator. The first is that this may be a situation where exploring the use of tax incremental financing districts might be sensible. Although, having lived in Westchester for a number of years earlier on in my life, no one wants to say taxes in Westchester, particularly if you're going to add them. But unfortunately, TIFs seem to be the way that many parts of the state have dealt with similar problems in the past. The second thing that I would say is, around the rest of the country, they generally create regional wastewater systems, and then the whole region takes on the process of building new systems and sharing the cost and sharing the operation. I will not say for a second that that's easy. When I worked for the state regulator in law school, I was the 10th law clerk in a row to be dealing with one large regional sewage system, and it wasn't any closer to the problems being fixed by the time I left 2 years later. The last thing I'd suggest, and this is a sort of pie-in-the-sky concept, is that the state has not often set up prizes for intelligent and, you know, pattern-breaking answers to these sorts of solutions, these situations. And I think that if the legislature was willing to create a series of contests around the state for public and private sector entities to get together and try and brainstorm what the best idea might be to do, and then come forward with a possible project that would be at a lesser or least cost, but with the most up-to-date upgraded infrastructure possible, that might not only help your portion of Westchester, but also other parts of the state. And the last piece on top of that, too, is that any work that's done needs to be coordinated with entities that run fiber optics for broadband, because you might as well get everything underground at the same time. Any new things that have to go underground should all go at the same time, because also all the utilities will share in the cost of putting all this stuff in. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I particularly was interested about the pattern breaking systems that you spoke about. We
Thanks, Eric.
know of decentralized septic systems, which are a cluster of enhanced treatment units, are about a third of the price of the big pipe conventional sewage treatment plant, and yet they're highly underutilized, much more cost effective, but we still have barriers with DEC and septic regulation for creating those districts. So that's one example of something that if we could incentivize, I think would bring the cost way down, particularly for smaller hamlets and villages.
I think that's true, sir.
Thank you, Senator Hinchey.
Thank you very much. And I also want to say we've been joined by our colleague, Senator Mayer. Thank you so much for joining. I'd like to now pass it to Senator May.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Hinchey, for assembling this forum, and all of you for your testimony. Ms. Van Epps, I had a question for you. You talked about the Dig Once policy in Syracuse, where I live. They've been doing this for a few years, and it's a great policy where if you're digging up the road, that you take care of the infrastructure below as well. But I'm wondering if there is policy that you need from us to facilitate that happening statewide, and especially given that there's also money coming for preventing lead in drinking water as well, if there's a way to make it more efficient so that all of these projects can be done together, if that is the best way to do it.
I apologize. I missed the first part.
Oh,
I'm a lip reader, so the mask is, I'm having a tough time
I'm
with-
sorry. Yeah, in Syracuse, when they dig up a road, they also take care
Oh.
of the infrastructure below. And you said you'd like to see that
Yes.
statewide, but I wonder what policies we need to facilitate that happening. Is state policy getting in the way of that happening across the state?
I can't really think of any policies that are getting in the way. I just think it's not, because we don't have the ability to look at them at the same time, to deal with our infrastructure underground and deal with our infrastructure above ground, the roads. I can't really think of a policy that's getting in the way. I just think it's a matter of resources and being able to count on a certain amount of resource and being able to plan. Do a multi-year plan for when you're gonna dig up a road, at the same time you're gonna deal with the infrastructure below. Because I think a lot of times with water and sewer infrastructure, because the money's not there, it's out of sight, out of mind. So you don't even realize there are issues under there sometimes. So I think it would just become the natural process that when you're gonna pave a road, you're gonna try to take a look at what's underneath that road before you do that, in order to make sure that you're not paving that road and then a year later digging it up to address the infrastructure below it. So I think it's just really a matter of having those two funding streams coming to municipalities at the same time, so they can do that multi-year planning, so they can make
Okay.
those investments as they go.
Thank you. And then following up to Senator Gorin's point, Mr. Gregoire, so I know in Onondaga County, we've had sprawl development for many years. It's starting to reverse, but when you have the same number of people in the county, but they're living farther and farther out, the water infrastructure becomes far more expensive. And do you see, given our home rule situation, what options are there for counties to steer development so that water infrastructure doesn't get so expensive?
Oh, that's another excellent question. I think in part it goes back to an earlier comment I made, which is looking at ways, and this goes to the planning element, but looking at ways to maximize opportunities. So if you're building out into a suburban area along a county road, not only is it taking a look at, okay, does that county road need resurfacing at this time, but also are there other corridors along that pathway that the county may own other parcels on, maybe we're running past the county airport, that you can use and incentivize the private sector to partner with you for economic development purposes on county-owned land. And that could help, in turn, fund water infrastructure underground that's needed. You know, I think Barb made an excellent point about looking at broadband. I think it was Barb, made an excellent point about looking at broadband at the same time. You know, that's another critical area that counties are looking to make investments in with their American Rescue Plan funding. You know, I think one thing that I'm hearing from the counties right now is there is a concern about how these federal dollars are going to flow to the state, and then how the state is going to manage and get that to flow down to the local governments. So if there's a policy area that we all may want to be brainstorming about is, how do we ensure that the funds that are going to be coming from the federal government, and if there's other allocations for broadband, chips, whether or not this bill is eventually passed and signed into law, how do we make sure that those synergies are all happening at the same time to maximize those resources, so we aren't digging up roads or stringing fiber on a utility pole, for example?
Okay, thanks. And then finally, none of you mentioned green infrastructure. I know in Onondaga County, there was a massive effort to divert stormwater from the combined sewer system through green infrastructure by just making it stay where it was, you know, a pool along, you know, in bioswales or ponds or various things. And I wonder, is that an option with the funding coming from the federal government? Is that something people are thinking about? Is it cost effective to do that? Does anyone know?
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of counties have, when they're resurfacing a parking lot at a library that they may own, or at their social services department, they're using construction materials that allow for that infrastructure to be permeable, so the water can go back into the ground rather than being run off into the storm water system. So it's absolutely cost effective. A lot of counties, and I think other municipalities as well, are doing that, using those kind of green, new, innovative techniques.
Yeah, actually, very old techniques, but yeah.
Yes, and Senator, I'd like to add, in my other life, not running this organization, I am the Commissioner for Zoning for the City of Albany. And we rezoned the city after 60 years of not changing the zoning, and we wrote into the new zoning sustainability, so that when private developers want to build new buildings or largely renovate old buildings, they're required to do a certain amount of sustainable development, but also we give them incentives. So if they create roofs that will limit the amount of water falling into the sewer system too quickly, they can get incentives, you know, maybe another half a story. If they create much more permeable pavement, or if they, you know, if they do water capture facilities under the ground, all those things can get them certain types of incentives for their development, depending upon the zone there is. And I think that there have been very good results with that in the city of Albany, and that in other cities and counties that do that kind of thing. I think you'll see that, but it'll also be built into the projects that the private sector is proposing, so it won't cost government anything.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Tedisco?
Thank you, Senator. And thank you for being here and for your testimony. I think it's pretty clear the dimensions of this concern cannot be overstated at this time. We have CHIPS Day out here. It's like the most popular day for the highway superintendents in this state. It's an unbelievable program. They love it. It couldn't be clearer that we need a sub-level sister for the CHIPS program, without question. The clearest illustration of that, and I want to give credit where credit is due. The first, if you want to call it CHIPS 2 or CHIPS Water, I called it SWAP when I first authored the bill. Every single senator and assembly person who interacts with their villages, their towns, and their counties, and those local municipal elected officials has been contacted about, what are we going to do about the breaks we get? We fill out an application. It takes us 2-3 months. This is an emergency. We can't be filling out applications for a grant that would be great to purchase the most up-to-date technology to really evaluate your sewer system and create a water system and gas system, because they're all close to hundreds of years of age and maintain them at an effective cost basis along the way. Now, the clearest illustration of this is there are 24 sponsors to the senator's bill. It's an enhanced bill from the bill I passed, you're probably familiar with that, in 2015. I believe it was unanimously in the New York State Senate, SWAP, Safe Water Infrastructure Action Plan. Made eminent sense. Mayfield, in my beautiful town, put down a beautiful road. 6 months later, it collapsed. Twice as much money. The director hit it on the head. The senator hit it on the head, talking about the fact, well, the answer I get from the assembly in some instances, we can't afford this. Can't afford not to do it because you're putting good money after bad. You're giving money for the upper level when the sub-level is costing, according to the comptroller, $30 to $40 billion over the next course of several years to maintain and to keep it up to snuff so it's not dangerous in terms of our water system or sewer infiltration and gas lines. Now, if you're wondering why I've become an advocate for this particular sister plan, I started out as a city councilman in the late 1970s. I was 11 years old, of course. No, that's not true. But at that time, they gave me a job. They said, we want you, we were getting a series of breaks in the city of Schenectady. I was a councilman in the city of Schenectady. Break after break. And they said, well, can you figure out that we can develop a plan? You know what the first thing I had them spend money on? A camera, the highest technology available. We sent a camera through our entire sewer system. You know what we did? We pinpointed those who were most depleted in our sewer and water and other lines. The problem was we could afford to maintain a couple of those, but there were in the hundreds of them that we had to put on the schedule, and we couldn't afford to do it. The clearest examples of this was 2 days ago. I don't know if you saw in Gloversville, in my district, a huge break. The water was pouring out. Now, the mayor there is not about to put an application in and let that tons of water flood the area. They need the money now, and they need the money in an emergency. But more importantly, you know, the Jackie Gleason show had this guy, Norton. He's the only guy that could have cut a ribbon on a sewer and water line, okay? Is that the reason why we won't expend money to save money down the road? Because we're throwing good money after bad by not creating this sister program for these emergencies. And the real question I'm going to be asking you, because I think part of this is just out of sight, out of mind. This has become a stepchild, our sub-level. And in most instances, it's probably going to be more costly down the road than our roads and bridges, our upper-level infrastructure, if we don't take care of it, because they both interact with each other. And mayors and trustees and councilmen can afford to vote and put together fixing roads and bridges with that CHIPS money, but they can't afford, as you said, to do the combination of the both. And if you don't do the combination, you're just throwing good money after bad money. So my question to you is, first of all, we need an assembly sponsor over there, and we've got to get them on board with this thing. It passed the Senate once unanimously, 24 sponsors on the senator's bill. She's enhanced the bill and made it even better right now. So we need your help to go to the assembly and say, can you help us with this? It's going to save money down the road. But let me ask you this question. You know, we talk about pipes and probably have to use some pipes, but there's new technology now, which I don't know if you've ever seen a gas tank that starts to leak. They don't replace them anymore. You know what they do? Now, we're not dealing with gas, but they have the technology that protects the integrity of our water. I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like a plastic. You put it through, it's closed up, they infrared it, it opens up. It's stronger, actually, and lasts longer, the metal in the hard technology that we put in there. I'm wondering, is the state of New York helping your local municipalities and mayors have access to an understanding of the new technology, which with the limited money they have, maybe they could purchase that technology through our state of New York at a cheaper price in bulk, municipalities working together, consolidation was mentioned, and a way to save money with the low level of money they have right now. But in terms of these grants, I think they're great down the road to get that technology to help people actually do a maintenance program, put that camera through their lines in there and say, hey, this is imminent. This is going to break down. We're not going to put a road on there. We're going to fix that first. But in emergencies, we need this sister program. And to help them with that, maybe you could advocate for them using some of the technology and assistance from the state in purchasing that. Is that something, do they have an understanding, your local mayors, and about this new technology? Yeah, you should contact OGS, DOT, and ask them about that, and see if you can get that information to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, just one quick comment on your thoughts there, Senator. And one thing I was thinking about since Senator Hinchy made her introductory comments was, another point of this legislation that could be useful is with all of this new federal money that's coming and with all of our different grant programs that are out there, if we could funnel those resources through this type of legislation as one program, then I think that helps speed along, and public water systems, private water systems could be tapping into some of this technology that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But it would certainly help deploy those resources more efficiently and faster.
And I don't know if I mentioned, I think I did, but the genesis of this that came to me was from Supervisor Phil Barrett from the town of Clifton Park. He came to me and he said, "Yeah, we put down a road and the whole thing collapsed because we can't get underneath there and see what's going on the bottom of that." I said, "You can't?" "No, it's too costly." And so we put in the first SWAP, Safe Water Infrastructure Action Plan, and maybe it makes too much sense for what goes on out here, but I think it's something that if we can get some assembly help in this, it did pass almost unanimously, and I'm sure most of us in the Assembly and Senate are getting contacted, too often about this type of need, and it's only going to be a bigger lurking monster down the road if we don't nip it in the bud and start to maintain it. But thank you for showing your concern for it.
Thank you, Mary, very much. Senator Barillo?
Thank you, Senator Hinchy, and I want to echo my colleagues' comments on, thank you for putting us all together today and doing this, and thank you all for being here. As a 10-year veteran of local government and as county executive for a few years, just listening to all this makes me itch to having to, it's really an issue. But I want to expand a little bit on what Senator May had said about what things that are holding us back, because, my experience in county government is there's a lot of regulations and laws that do indeed hold us back from doing things efficiently. I remember, for example, you start talking about certified technicians at water and wastewater treatments, and you can't share them. You can't share a manager or supervisor with multiple districts. Yet we have these incentives for regionalizing things. So I think there is conflict there. I think there is room for us to change and reform those laws. We put a new sewer system in around Chautauqua Lake recently, and we said, well, can we run water lines? Oh, no, you can't run water lines at the same time. That's not allowed. So my question is, I kind of want to ask the same question that Senator May said, again, coming from the experience of being in county government, is I believe there certainly is issues and conflicts with how the state handles situations like that. So just using those couple examples I've given you, could you maybe expound on that a little bit?
I could just jump in and comment. You're absolutely right with the water and wastewater operators. That is clearly a problem in our cities and villages. The shortage there, the fact that they can't work together. So I know I have heard that from our members. The other thing that I recently heard, just recently as yesterday, is when, and I can't say exactly which grant program they were applying for, but obviously, our small municipalities, I have to say this now, our small municipalities, a lot of them just can't afford to apply. These grants are time consuming, there's cost, there's upfront cost, and even in the planning grants that the state offers, they're oversubscribed, but also there's a local match even when you have those planning grants. So you have to come up with these engineering plans. A lot of our small municipalities just have to walk away because they don't have the ability they don't have the resources to even put those applications in. So I just throw that out there because we think now that the state has ARPA money and they're getting some additional federal money, that maybe this frees up some other money that the state can actually waive the local match and maybe help some of our smaller municipalities get access to the revolving funds and things like that. But no, there are definitely some issues there with just being able to access this money and use the money to the best of your ability. But the example I was going to give you was we had a community that was community, I believe on a water or wastewater system, And the state, for some reason, was requiring an outside, so a third-party engineer and a third-party attorney to come in and work with these communities to work out the details of the system that the village engineer has been working on for 15 or 20 years. And the state was requiring them to have this third-party engineer come in who doesn't know the system at all, but also have a third-party attorney come in at the cost of those two municipalities just to apply for the grant, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. So that's just another example. I don't know where that is written, but to have that additional expense when you have people in these communities that clearly understand the systems, understand what they're trying to accomplish, I don't know if it makes sense to have them have to spend more money just to try to apply for that grant money.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and again, I counted those things as well. You know, there was these barriers put in place, not necessarily legislatively, but, you know, we could legislate that you shouldn't do those things. I mean, you mentioned broadband. The DOT is making fiber optic companies resurvey poles that are already existing before they can run fiber optic cable, you know, which delays the programs, increases the cost. You know, I'm very happy to co-sponsor with Senator Hinchey removing the DOT fee on broadband. I think that's a great thing to do, because you said, well, why don't we be smart? Why don't we bury fiber optic cable at the same time running water lines? The problem is that fee, if the fee, not only is it excessive, but if you go underground, it's like exponentially higher per foot to bury the cable than it is to run it on a pole. So there's no doubt a lot of inefficiencies that are created by bad state policy, and certainly just local regulations on local government like that. So, Brian, I mean, you know, you and I know this. So.
Thanks, Senator Borrello. And that is a bill that NISAC, that's another priority bill that NISAC supports, and we thank Senator Hinchey for sponsoring that with Assemblymember Warner. You know, I think to piggyback off of something what Senator Tedisco just mentioned, you know, from NISAC, we are 100%, and I'm not going to speak for NICOM, but I'm sure they would agree with this, we're 100% committed to working with all of you to try and identify and get an assembly sponsor and get an assembly champion on this. Because this, in our opinion, this is perfect timing, right? We've got broadband dollars that are flowing through the Infrastructure Investment Job Act. That's $65 billion nationwide. There's another allocation coming in with the Build Back Better agenda if that passes at the federal level. We've got $9 billion, of which $4 billion will come to New York State for lead remediation. And then we've also got our existing CHIPS program set up. So it really does make sense to look at how do we address these regulatory issues if there are, but also all these different funding buckets that are coming in. We ought to be, and the counties are very supportive of looking at ways to plan this out that makes sense. There are some communities that are desperate for expanding broadband, some communities that are desperate for working on water infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, there's a county upstate that has built a brand new facility. They need to run water to that facility. But I think what's going to end up happening is they're going to end up placing wells on site rather than running that water system, when in fact that could have been used for an economic development purpose as well. So there's situations out there across the state where we can probably work together and maximize this.
Well, yeah, and you bring up another point. I'm in Western New York, where we have access to the greatest fresh water in the world, the Great Lakes, and yet we still have municipalities that are working off of wells and reservoirs with, as we like to call it, deferred maintenance, which means things are crumbling because they haven't been maintained. There's disincentives essentially to regionalize because of crumbling infrastructure. We had a big victory in our area with the North County Water District in Chautauqua County, but we have municipalities that don't want to join because they have so many leaks in their system that if they start buying the water from the regional system, it's going to cost them too much for all the water that's leaking out of the system. So it's a real issue, and it runs counter to the idea of being efficient and sharing services and regionalizing, for sure. So, but thank you all for participating and for your bringing these issues forward.
If I could just add, because you mentioned the word disincentive, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the tax cap. Not that I know the tax cap is very popular, I know the tax cap is not going away, but if we could get that capital exclusion from the tax cap, municipalities could, the same way the schools have, that would go a long way for us to try to take the money that we're getting and be able to invest that, and that fact that we have to consider our municipal capital expenditures as part of that tax cap calculation
Well, let me
really
also,
hurts local governments.
to piggyback on what you said, they just announced today that inflation ran at 6.8% recently. So there may have to be a conversation, unless we can get inflation under control, about adjusting the tax cap. You can't, it was great when we had, a fraction of 1% in core inflation, but now we're at 6.8% and certainly not looking to go away anytime soon. This is a real issue that has to be addressed.
Thank you very much, Senator Jordan.
Sure. Good morning to my colleagues and to the
Morning.
panelists. Thank you for being here today. And Senator Hinchey, thank you for organizing this important forum. I serve and represent the 43rd Senate District, which includes most of Rensselaer County. And so while, we're talking primarily here about aging infrastructure being a premier problem and emergencies associated with that, my district is home to the town of Hoosick, the village of Hoosick Falls, the town of Petersburg, Nassau, which has 2 EPA sites, and as of late, the Post and Kill. So my focus is on emergencies that are connected with contamination. And of course, funding for that is difficult. Richard Elder was, pointed that out. But I think before we're able to find the source of the contamination and who's responsible, a problem with the municipalities involved and with the county is who is paying for all the testing that needs to be done? Who is paying for, poets that might have to be installed? And I know Rensselaer County has spent about $50,000 so far. And maybe, Richard, you can tell us how that funding works, what's available, and from what I hear, really only 36% of your costs come from state aid. So
Right.
How do we address that?
So exactly. When we have these emergencies, the first thing we use is the water grant when it's available. Obviously, as we expend those funds, it then just comes out of the county tax base, to which we do get the 36% reimbursement through the Article 6, but the rest of that is coming out of the county's general fund, or we're robbing the proverbial Peter to pay Paul and taking it from somewhere else to cover that cost. But it's a cost that needs to be had, The priority there is to make sure that we are identifying wells in an area of concern and ensuring that the people that are drinking their water know what it is that they're drinking, and if necessary, have the proper education and treatment on those wells, and that takes the priority.
So does DEC help with these costs? When does the county get paid back, if it gets paid back?
So in Petersburg, we had a very similar situation in Petersburg where the county initiated the site sampling around the source of contamination in Petersburg. A little bit different scenario there. We had a reasonably understood responsible party before they were determined to be responsible party. So while the county was doing the sampling, the county was also reaching out to that party and discussed with them that if, in fact, they were determined to be the responsible party, that we would be seeking reimbursement. And so I believe that the county did get reimbursed a lot of their out-of-pocket expense from that responsible party. This situation's a little bit different with no defined responsible party. At this point, I'm not sure the county expects to get reimbursed until, or if there is a responsible party identified that we may be able to go back to. DEC has been helpful in the fact that homes that did test above the drinking water level, utilizing what we utilize for public water supplies, that level. If a private home tested above that, the state DEC did absorb the cost of providing bottled water and installing the POET systems on those homes, and including the cost of maintaining those POET systems, at least indefinitely until a long-term solution is fixed, or if a responsible party is identified, then DEC obviously can recoup their costs.
What would you recommend in fixing this cost and funding?
There just got to be, and I look at the school, like, so the school itself took immediate action. And the school, as a taxing, a municipal district of itself, has expended significant funds for they are installing a, treatment system on their wells so that they can again use the wells. Since this started in January, the school has absorbed the cost of providing bottled water for cooking for all of their culinary needs, as well as for drinking fountains within the school. It goes back to, I think Senator Tedisco mentioned that they then have to apply, and maybe they're going to get some of those funds back, depending on what the state's going to allow them to recoup and what they're not. But the school has spent, upwards, I don't know their exact number, but several tens of thousands of dollars to correct this problem, of which they may get some of it back through an application process down the road. So I don't know, somehow there's got to be, when we have these emergencies, first off, I think there's got to be a better pool. The counties have a responsibility not only to public water, but to private water. And the counties have a responsibility to make sure that everyone is drinking and is safe and has healthy water. And we take that job serious, whether we have the funds or not. I think we need to have better resources so that we can better utilize strengthen our resources to better respond to these types of situations. And they're becoming more and more popular. Across the state, we have counties dealing with chloride emergencies, some of these other legacy contaminations down on the island and down in Orange County. So these situations of water contamination and things are becoming more and more frequent, and the response sometimes becomes more expensive.
I'll just add that it's never been more clear that we need a major overhaul in Article 6 state aid funding for local health departments, because I know we're talking about water today, which is super critically important. There are so many other public health emergencies that we're responding to protect the public. So we really need to look at that, and we're here to be your partners and give you feedback on that.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. And Senator Mayer?
Thank you very much, and I apologize for missing the beginning. I did want to raise an issue that I don't think has been addressed, which in my district, the consequences of Hurricane Ida and resulted in flooding because of the lack of infrastructure investment in suburban communities as development occurred. They basically never enlarged their capacity to handle increased water, both flood water, sewage, the whole works. They just said yes, basically, to development with very little insight. What happened is roadways that were completely outside of a floodplain and had never flooded before, flooded, and thousands of people's basements were completely destroyed at costs of about $50,000 to repair each one, not obtainable through FEMA. So now we are backed into a position where we're sending a letter, my assembly colleagues and I, to every one of these mayors and supervisors saying, oh, do you know about these 15 programs you could have applied for funding under the state to enhance or expand your water system or improve it, so that your people who all of a sudden, who never paid attention before, who are now enraged that their towns and villages never applied for this money, won't be damaged. So one of my issues is, I think some of you have said that, we're built and baked into a system which requires a fairly forward-thinking county or municipality to apply. And from a homeowner point of view, that's really not very satisfactory, because they're entitled to a system that works, that meets climate change and the demands that we're going to have. So one is, what would you recommend to get, you're all talking about fairly forward-thinking counties and municipalities, but not every county, town, and village has been that way. And now we're in a system where we're telling these town, village supervisors, oh, you could apply for all these things, which take years to get out the door, and years to do, and the studies that you mentioned, and the additional costs out of pocket. Meanwhile, a homeowner is terrified of the next large rainstorm. So I just wonder what your constructive ideas, I have some, but you're on the ground, and I would appreciate your suggestion.
Senator Mayor, if I may, thank you. That's an excellent question. And I think it goes back to one of my earlier points, which is, rather than having 15 different grant pools, which take years to apply for, and complexity, and then there might be engineering duplication, et cetera, that's why Senator Hinchy's bill is so important, because it streamlines the funding
Right.
opportunity, and it gets the money out the door fast. Whether we can, I hope the state will be able to direct the federal funds through an easy mechanism like that as well. And I think that's possibly one opportunity to go forward with, is to streamline these funding streams to make it easier.
Yeah, agreed.
And I would just add, streamline is the key word there, and I would just add, and make the rules the same. I mean, you have these 15 different grant programs, and the rules and requirements for each of those programs is different. So not only do you not know where to go, but you don't know what you're up against as you're starting to use those grant programs. So there's just got to be a better way to just come together. And this is a good opportunity to, I hate forming task force because, what comes out of that. But this is a great opportunity to get some of our members who have gone through the process to sit down with some folks at the state level and some legislators and try to figure out, where the true obstacles are and how best to address this. Because, as Ryan said, we have money now. And there's got to be a way that we can capitalize on the fact that we have the ARPA funds, locals and the state. And now we have the IIJA money coming through. And, we should take this opportunity to really think strategically about how we can use these funds to the best of, best use for the state and best use for the local governments.
And Senator, if I may, I would concur with my colleagues from the Conference of Mayors and the Association of Counties, and I would suggest a couple of things. The first, I had suggested to Senator May that the municipalities look to do rezoning and even rezoning on a county level basis to create more sustainable development, because we have areas of the city of Albany that have flooded since colonial times. We hadn't done anything about that until 2 years ago. And so we're trying to look forward, and I hope that we're getting better results. We'll find out. The second thing that I would suggest is, as everyone has said, that you look to more legislation like Senator Hinchy's to streamline the use of money on these sorts of situations. The last thing I'd suggest is to do something that I was involved in many years ago when I worked for the city of New York, to open a small business in the city of New York 25 years ago, as Senator Tedesco said when I was 11 years old. You had to go to 32 different city agencies to open a business. And there were people whose profession was to shortcut all that stuff because they knew someone. Like, that was crazy. And what we ended up doing was to create a one-stop application. Yeah. And so having a one-stop application that can be reused across all of these 15 different programs, and having one site, granted it's on the internet, one website that can let you apply for all the things that you're eligible for at the same time, would make a big difference in this area too, because you shouldn't have to be spending all of your time learning to look for the resources. The agencies of our government in New York do not tell you what they do. They do not tell you how they can help you. You have to go find it yourself, and that has to change. And I thank you for your question, because I think that brings that up.
And I think we have to make sure that we are putting funding for these small, the private water systems. Like was said earlier, one of the biggest issues here is all of this funding that we're talking about is only available to municipal systems, and there's so many private systems out there that they don't have access even to this funds.
Thank you. I would say, slightly unrelated, but as a result of this, I'm proposing a cabinet-level Office of Flood Management to have a much more unified, thoughtful, and best practices approach to flood management, because I think in my district, flooding turned into a conversation of water infrastructure that was sorely needed, and I think we need to be on the same page. I'm hopeful with this governor, we're going to have more of that approach. But.
Great, well, thank you. And with that, I think we complete the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Senator.
Thank you all for being here. I'd like to call up our next panel. That's Mayor Amy Sarago from the Village of Athens, Supervisor Jeff Russo from the town of New Baltimore, Supervisor Melinda McKnight, town of Hurley, and Mayor Michael Cinquanti, City of Amsterdam.
How was your Thanksgiving?
Does he know about the federal?
Quiet is good. Hey, Leah. Quiet is good. Good thing. Quiet. We'll take quiet. Good panel. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm in a fog here.
And you?
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for being here. For the sake of time and not to keep people too much here, we're going to limit some of the questions to 5 minutes, our 5-minute block. And then, but if there's a great line, we'll discuss. But I want to say thank you all for coming, and to jump right in, we will start with Mayor Sarago from the Village of Athens.
Hi. Hello. Thank you all for having me today. I'm excited to speak to you a little bit about the Village of Athens. My name tag says town, but I represent the village. We're a charming historic village on the banks of the Hudson River, founded in 1805. Our community is approximately 1,600 residents, and we're a big mix of families who've been there for generations and transplants, many from New York City. Well, for full-timers and weekenders, and we have varying backgrounds and political affiliations. And since the onset of the pandemic, we've been growing every day. And like many historic villages in our area, we have our fair share of water and sewer infrastructure woes. Our DPW director and our water sewer systems manager have informed me in no uncertain terms that our infrastructure, what is beneath our roads, has, quote, exceeded its projected useful life. The majority of our water and sewer mains date back to the 1930s and are in need of replacement. We still have lead pipes in our system, and actually I found out last night a few clay pipes. That doesn't sound too good. But most of our pipes are made of cast iron, and they are decaying. In addition, because of years of buildup inside them, most 6-inch pipes now have a capacity of only about 3 inches to carry water. We routinely face water main breaks, approximately 6 in the last year. And actually last night, after I had sent in my testimony, I was informed that we're aware that we have a leak going on right now to the tune of about 100 gallons a minute, an hour. It's a lot. And we just don't know where it is yet. So we know it's coming. It'll bust through, and we'll patch it up like we always do. But we're on watch. There's another unique system, feature of our system, and that's our pipe placement. Our water mains currently run through our sewer manholes in many places throughout the village. This means that drinking water pipes and wastewater pipes are inches apart from one another. Modern standards for separation of these conveyances is a minimum of 10 feet. So you should never see a water main inside a sewer manhole. The risk of drinking water contamination in the event of a sewer pipe leak or break is incredibly high. The systems manager, who works with several other communities, told me he's never seen this setup in any other municipality. And this is not something that we want to be known for in the Village of Athens. We have done several slip lining projects, most recently in 2019 with money we received through NYSERDA's Clean Energy Communities Program. We had a $30,000 award, and we were able to slip line approximately 200 feet of our 10 miles of piping. However, in many cases, the slip lining is no longer effective due to the age and condition of our pipes. The projected cost, as I'm told, to replace water and sewer mains is $250 a foot. Remember, we have 10 miles of pipes. Because of ongoing problems with inflow and infiltration, we've also been advised that we should invest in storm drains at the same time, and that's a cost of $150 a foot. And who knows how long those costs will stand with the rate of everything increasing. In addition, our SCADA, that's their supervisory control and data acquisition system, is outdated and needs replacing. We have done several repairs over the years, but as we all know, tech has a short shelf life. So the estimated cost to replace this is $400,000. It's not all bad news in Athens, though. The latest reports on our wastewater treatment plant and our water treatment facilities are good. The village invested significant funds in improvements to these facilities approximately 10, 15 years ago. However, in order to do the work we have done, we've taken significant bonds. All totaled, we've borrowed nearly $7.8 million to improve those two facilities. The longest standing bond originated in 1994 and has a payoff date of 2032. Our current water sewer debt load won't be paid in full until 2040, and that's assuming we don't have to borrow more. We've received some grants in the past, but the overwhelming majority of what we've spent has been borrowed. Often the cost of consultant or engineer's fees to prepare the grant applications is prohibitive as well. We've also been denied grants because our median income level falls just above the threshold for need-based funding like community development block grants and brownfield opportunity area funding. And now we've had an influx over the past year or so of a little bit more well-to-do residents, and so our median income is only rising. However, we still have our original residents there, of course. There has been a renewed interest in our community, and I'm very excited about that. People want to invest in Athens, but with that comes the potential for more strain on our already taxed systems. And I believe we need to be ready for the future that's knocking on our door. We did receive ARPA funding this summer, and we put it to good use right away by making some overdue upgrades at our reservoir at the Hollister Lake Dam on Schoharie Turnpike. With these funds, we've also engaged an engineer to do a full assessment of our system so that we can have a solid plan for the future if and when more funding becomes available. Each year, we receive CHIPS and Pave New York funding to address issues on the surface level, but there is no similar mechanism to address the subterranean, and I believe a funding program like that focuses on water infrastructure would be invaluable to not only our, but many of our historic communities in the area. We are a big mix of folks in Athens. We have varying backgrounds and political affiliations, but on the needs for improvement to our water sewer infrastructure, we wholeheartedly agree. We're ready to take on the challenge. We just need the financial resources to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Russo.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Russo. I'm the town supervisor of the town of New Baltimore, also in Greene County, as my colleague to my left. We are a town of about approximately 3,200 people. On the evening of June 1st, 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, I got a call late at night because we had a main water break for our District 2. District 2 serves 32 homes. District 2 gets the water from the Village of Cooksaki, who builds the town, who in turn we build the users. The water main break was under the New York State Thruway, southbound lane. The southbound lane, in fact, the Thruway Authority was the one who alerted us to this because they had a dip in their roadbed. So in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of the night, the break could not have been in a worse place or at a worse time. So we quickly moved, called a state of emergency. We did have some tankers bring water in so that those homes would have water until we could figure out what was going to be done. Well, it took a number of months and a lot of tankers full of water. But what we did was we replaced that pipe. The pipe was 100+ years old. Cost $330,000, 32 users. That's a lot of money. And of course, my constituents are none too happy. There had been no planning ahead of time. People such as myself and my predecessors, we don't have that expertise. I know very little of water systems. My profession is altogether different. Nevertheless, as I said, it could not have been a worse place. The problem remaining is that the only section of that pipe that was replaced was the part under the thruway. The remainder of that pipe is still in use on both sides of the thruway. So I have a 100-year-old pipe in section on the east side of the thruway and a 100-year-old pipe on the west side of the thruway. And I can't imagine how much longer they will last. So thankfully, the thruway, they initially indicated that we would have to pay for the repair of the roadbed as well. But thankfully, they did not. That was going to add approximately another $300,000. So I'm eternally grateful to them as our users. The voids that we have are with funding, as we can all, and I've heard other people speak of here. These 32 users they really don't have they're having trouble affording the $330,000 because we did a bond and it's payable 4 times a year so that it doesn't hit them too hard at once. We have to replace those other pipes, and that's going to cost another $500,000 to $600,000 according to the engineers who have given us their evaluations of it. We do have some ARPA money. The total for the town that we would receive from ARPA is about $360,000. The replacement of this pipe is about $500,000. And that doesn't, and of course you can't apply it towards existing debt. We had to get a bond, and by the time the ARPA come, we had already signed the papers on the bond. So we have a problem with funding. We're going to use as much as we possibly can of the ARPA money. And there's also another void that I can speak of, and I guess I'm denigrating myself, but I don't mean to. I dare say that myself, my fellow town board members, and it's probably true elsewhere, we don't have the expertise. I don't know the things about my water system. I don't know them ahead of time. My predecessor, who I spoke to, had no idea that that pipe was 100 years old. There is no detail, no information. There's no evaluation of this water district having been presented to me. And I can assure you that I did not, stay awake at night wondering how that pipe is going to be doing tonight. So we need funding and we need expertise to sum it all up. So that's pretty much all I have to say for today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Supervisor McKnight. Senator Hinchey and honorable members, thank you for convening these panels to discuss the importance of ensuring clean water to the citizens of New York State. It is an honor to be here representing the town of Hurley as a current council member, supervisor-elect, and as a resident personally impacted by a privately owned water company. In a town of 6,500 residents, sorry, I just lost my testimony. In a town of 6,500 residents, Hurley has no municipal water supply. In the communities of West Hurley and Glenford, bedrock lies just 24 inches below, on average, below the surface of the ground. Most residents in Hurley draw water from private wells, and in some areas, wells run dry during the summer months. Over the years, the town has conducted studies to determine the feasibility of solving the problem by creating water districts. However, the cost is exorbitant for the residents to shoulder. Approximately 1,300 residents in the town of Hurley receive water from 2 private water companies. The former is a small, locally owned company, serves about 1,100 residents, has a really good reputation. The latter is owned by a company based on Long Island. It serves about 75 households in Hurley and currently provides water to 447 households across 4 New York State, across 4 Ulster County towns of Marbletown, Saugerties, Hurley, and Olive. It should be noted that it also serves an elementary school. Customers of Hudson Valley Water Company number 4, where I have lived for the past 14 years, have reported frequent water main breaks, water quality issues, damage to private property due to repairs made by the company that are generally not fixed. The private property is not maintained and put back, made whole. Lengthy service outages that can last days, questionable billing practices, insufficient water pressure to fire hydrants, and bullying tactics by the owner. The problem with System 4 particularly, although I suspect others as well, stems from 60-year-old crumbling asbestos cement water mains. pH levels of about 5.5 that occur within the system. They're not naturally occurring. That pH is not a naturally occurring level, which created high copper levels in our water that exceeded EPA limits between the years of 2004 and 2020. Every resident I have spoken with who is served by Hudson Valley Water Company number 4 buys drinking water. According to the World Health Organization, drinking acidic water causes gastric upset and other negative health effects. Hurley residents have lobbied town officials, county legislators, and state representatives. They have met with attorneys and investigated the feasibility of drilling wells on their own property. A number of them have. They have requested that applications for rate increases be denied due to the documented problems that have existed since the early 1970s and have only worsened over time. They continue to request the Department of Health increase testing schedule for contaminants. They've asked for more aggressive oversight of Hudson Valley Water Companies, which has fallen on deaf ears. They seek transparency about an ongoing investigation by the Department of Public Service, and in return, they see redacted documents posted on the DPS website and are generally kept in the dark about the status of the 49 recommendations included in the report. When I personally contacted the Ulster County Department of Health in 2019, an official told me that they haven't received any complaints about water quality regarding Hudson Valley Water Companies, and then hung up the phone. After submitting FOIL requests, I discovered 30 violations had been filed, which contradicted what I was told. During another conversation, an official from Ulster County Department of Health stated that, quote, low pH is not a health issue. Our concern is primarily service. In a letter dated March 2019 from Susan B., Office of Consumer Services at DPS, stated that, quote, we do not oversee water quality issues. You'll need to bring this issue to your local Board of Health for Ulster County, which of course we have to virtually no avail. The entire process is confusing, lacks transparency, and is designed to protect the profit margin and solvency of the company, which imperils the residents' health and well-being. The fact is that customers who receive their water supply from privately owned companies have no rights. They are at the mercy of regulatory agencies that protect the profit margin of the private utility companies instead of protecting the public. When the utility is water, which is essential to all life, this seems especially cruel. As New York State senators, you have some degree of oversight over the Department of Public Service. And I encourage you to exercise your authority to the fullest extent possible to protect the people of New York from falling victim to bureaucracy when the issue is water. I ask that you all investigate propose a way to provide customers on private water companies with the same rights that customers of public water supplies enjoy. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mayor Cinquanti.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking the senator who has so skillfully represented my beloved city during her first year as a state legislator, the Honorable Michelle Hinchy, for making it possible for me to be here this morning. I also want to thank the esteemed members of this forum, Senator Tedisco, a familiar face to our community, also as well, for recognizing that municipalities of all sizes across our great Empire State are in dire need of investment in our water systems. I am hoping our collective testimony will provide you with the information and data you can use to help convince your fellow legislators and the executive branch to make the process of securing infrastructure funding for water not so much easier or faster, but instead more efficient. As much as I agree that competition for state funding can be generally a good thing, I'm here to emphasize that at this time, in this state, every municipality has very specific, very critical, and well-documented needs for significant infrastructure investment. And the faster we can get federal and state infrastructure dollars invested in these projects, the faster and greater will be the return on those investments. Permit me to use the recent distribution of CHIPS funding in our state as an example. Instead of forcing local governments to justify the dollars they need to repair the streets in their city, a formula based on the total mileage of streets within the municipality is applied. Our city gets a lump sum of money, and we use our own intimate knowledge of the condition of every square inch of roadway in our community to spend every dollar we get as efficiently as possible. Thanks to the pandemic relief monies the federal government finally made available to the state of New York, our city received almost 3 times the amount of road repair aid as we did the previous year. And we were ready with a road evaluation program already in place. The result is that already 7 miles of the worst, most heavily traveled sections of streets in our city are now the best streets in our city. And the citizens of Amsterdam are noticing it and are raving about it. Like with our streets, our city has a list of priority projects within our water infrastructure systems, which urgently require funding. Each of them will deliver measurable and urgently needed benefits to the citizens and taxpayers of Amsterdam. I will describe 3 of them briefly for you. I have several. Project number 1. Amsterdam's drinking water supply originates in the foothills of the Adirondacks at 3 city-owned reservoirs in the Glen Wild Reserve. The reserve is located 15 miles north of the city, connected to our water filtration plant by a single 24-inch cast iron pipe, which is over a century old and traverses a 15-mile path through a diverse topography of both heavily wooded and rural areas, including significant stretches of wetlands. If that pipeline breaks, our city will run out of drinking water in 24 hours. We have to have a system in place that guarantees we can locate a break, get to it with the equipment necessary to repair it, and make that repair within a 24-hour time frame. This project, which we are making shovel-ready now, will involve locating GPS marking, environmental permitting, clearing, and implementing monitoring technology tools along the entire path of that pipeline. Project number 2. The pipeline empties into our city-owned and operated water filtration plant, which was built in 1974. We are currently under a debt consent order to install a corrosion control process at the plant, which is designed to reduce the lead level of our system's treated water. Our first application for CDBG funding for this project was denied this summer. We've submitted for the second round of CDBG funding, and we're waiting to hear if we are successful. The consent order's compliance deadline is April of 2022. Again, we are shovel-ready for that. Project number 3, our city-owned wastewater treatment system was also built in the 1970s. Based on its aging infrastructure, limited capacity, and another DEC consent order, Amsterdam is faced with the necessity to perform a large capital expenditure upgrade to this system. In the process of designing the upgrade, we are integrating an anaerobic digestion process which will generate operational savings and new revenue generation of approximately $700,000. We will use this $700,000 to help finance the project. When factored into the financing, it cuts the city's net present financing costs for the project up to 2/3. Amsterdam's fiscal situation has not been one that you could call rosy in recent times. And when I took office in January of 2019, we were actually ranked the most fiscally distressed city in our state. I'm still waiting for the final independent audit to be completed for 2021 fiscal year, but I'm expecting that it will confirm we have cut our deficit by over half in 2 years. And my goal is to have it eliminated by the end of 2023. We've also made sure the burden of getting out of debt is not being borne solely on the backs of Amsterdam's taxpayers by searching hard for both short and long-term cost savings and revenue generation opportunities and putting together the political will, partnerships, and financing scenarios necessary to take advantage of them. I don't want to leave you with the impression we're not making investments in our water system infrastructure. We've spent millions in vital upgrades these past 2 years on both our drinking water and wastewater systems, and these investments are already producing better quality and cost savings. But in the process, we've also increased our city's balance on EFC loans to $13.2 million. In the case of the 3 water infrastructure projects I've touched upon, the solutions being prepared won't just improve the quality of our drinking water and wastewater services and prevent our city from additional fines. Each will also make the ongoing operation of these systems dramatically more cost-effective into the future, and it will be our city's government responsibility to make sure that those savings are targeted back into the investments necessary to maintain these systems in the future. In summary, I believe sincerely that the municipalities in this great state are keenly aware of exactly which investments in their water infrastructure systems are most urgent and offer the greater return and value to their citizens' safety and quality of life. The total cost of the 3 projects I've discussed will be right around $20 million, and we are currently making sure each of them is shovel-ready. Use the record amounts of infrastructure funding coming from the federal government as the opportunity to establish and test a fair formula-based system for distributing drinking and wastewater infrastructure aid, and empower the municipalities of our state to make the best possible use of every penny. Again, I thank you for giving me and my city this opportunity to provide input on this critical issue.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you for being here today and for sharing the stories of your individual villages, towns, and cities. Mayor, I'd like to ask, why was your original CDBG denied, and how does the grant process structure open for all of you? How does that grant process structure work for all of you in your individual towns? Because we know it's incredibly cumbersome. How do you handle that?
Of course, whenever we are denied a grant, we try to find out the reasons for why we were denied. And the reason we were giving for that particular grant was that I want to say they wanted to see us put some skin in the game. And I understood that. We understood that. But there was no other reason given to us other than the fact that it's very competitive. That money was very competitive in that first round. And we were told to, don't worry, resupply, et cetera. But again, 7 months have passed, and it made it very difficult.
Similarly, we had applied for a CDBG grant for the planning study that we're now doing with the ARPA funding we received, and we were denied, like I said in my testimony, based on our median income being, I think it was something like 1% too high to really show that we had the need. And it was similar, we went for a brownfield opportunity area study to kind of get some funding to really get, like the mayor said, shovel ready for some of the projects that we want to look at. And it was, again, and it's odd because like I said, we're mixed. So when I tell my constituents that we didn't get a grant because we make too much money, they laugh. They laugh at me. So the need-based funding is very difficult to come by, and the hoops that you need to jump through to do it are prohibitive on a lot of occasions. The brownfield study, just applying, cost us $5,000. My predecessor, the mayor before me, had a very strong feeling that it would be excellent for our village, and I think it would have been. But I didn't go for it again this year because I sat with the consultants and they said, look, your numbers aren't lining up. So I said, I can't turn to this little village and say, we're going to spend $5,000 on something that's a crapshoot. And we're basically volunteers, my village board. We don't really get paid. So, a little bit. But it's hard to have people full-time there to do this work. So we end up hiring consultants, and it costs money. And then when you don't get the funding, it's a big letdown for everyone.
I think that for ourselves, it's very similar. In our particular emergency, we had to fund it and get it done because we had, again, 32 users without any water at all. Most of the grants do not apply or are not eligible to be used to existing debt. And we are, as I think I pointed out, looking at various grant opportunities. With the evaluation that our engineers are to have to us shortly in terms of the total costs. Right now, it looks like we'll have some funding through ARPA to pay for, as I described, we have one side of the thruway with old pipe and the other side with old pipe. We have funding for half of that, it seems. So our grant opportunities have been limited, but our engineers have indicated there's a lot of eligibility issues that we would not find appropriate, or you folks, the state wouldn't find appropriate, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. And quickly, Supervisor Russo, you said that, I imagine this is for all of our small towns, there's not necessarily a lot of specific expertise in water infrastructure maintenance and even grant writing.
Right.
And when we know that's expensive and takes a lot of time, you mentioned a point of contact. Who do you typically, is there anyone at the state level that you can turn to for help on that type of guidance or that kind of support?
Not that I'm aware of. We've been working with our engineers mostly who know the contacts much better than we do, because they've worked at other municipalities. I've never had to call these people prior to this event. They know them, so fortunately they've been very helpful, and they have the contact points that I do not have.
I've only been mayor for a short time. I was elected, I took office in April. So like you said, we have engineers that have these contacts. I did speak to Charles Fillion from the Office of Community Renewal when we didn't get the CDBG, and he was very helpful, actually, and he pointed me in the direction of some other things that we can look into for next year. So that was good. I'm trying to make those connections, but again, like I said, it's no one's full-time job being on the Board of Trustees in the Village of Athens. It's becoming that, but it's hard. So we do work with our village engineers, and I'm lucky to have a couple of boards back. One smart cookie hired an outside consultant to run our water and sewer. It's a firm that works with a couple of municipalities, and he's very knowledgeable, so that's been helpful. So we do have that going for us. But as far as making connections, I'm working on it.
In our case, we have, in our water district, we have 0 employees.
We're fortunate, Senator, we have a grant writer working on staff with us, but we do spend an awful lot of money with our engineering, contracted engineers to help us apply for these grants, and it can become onerous.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now call on Senator May.
Thank you. And just following up to all of that, I hope you're all aware of the EPA's Environmental Finance Center and the Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Finance Center. So the EPA actually has anticipated these problems, and they have services for local governments. We had a great event about a month ago for municipalities in my district with the EPA Environmental Finance Center that's actually located at Syracuse University. And I imagine we'll be partnering with other senators to do that more statewide. I wanted to come back to the planning question too, because there is the question of expertise, but there's also, I don't even know how to say this, years ago when I kept talking about issues of sustainability in my county, people said if you even use the phrase land planning, people think you're trying to take them back to the Soviet Union or something like that. So I'm just wondering what it takes to get people to understand that land use planning and water infrastructure planning is about economic efficiency, it's about saving people money down the road. Have you encountered like ideological resistance to this kind of process?
I have not. We have a pretty supportive citizenry when it comes to improving our water infrastructure. It's a known fact that for years people were like, we just get bottled water, just don't drink it. Our water passes muster every time, but people, it might have a little bit of a taste, and everybody says it's safe, so people don't really want to drink it, but we haven't had really resistance to this planning. I think we've explained it well that we need to have this done in order to get in line for bigger funding down the road. And I've had support from my residents as far as the planning work that we're doing goes.
Right, and I did want to follow up on something you said about the population growing in your village. I believe very strongly that we're going to see an influx of climate migrants to the Northeast and especially to upstate New York, where we have such abundant fresh water, which is becoming so scarce around the world. And so I do believe this kind of planning has to take into account the long-term potential growth of our population and how we're going to manage our water supplies accordingly. Thank you all.
Thank you. Senator Gorin.
Thank you. Supervisor McKnight, your testimony, you talked about the frustration with private water, which is something that I've been facing in my district, and the people I represent, and this is only my third year in the Senate, they've been dealing with this for quite a long time. Basically tried every opportunity to go to the Public Service Commission, sue the Public Service Commission. The Village has spent money hiring lawyers to try to deal with these rate increases, and I'm not sure how that can be fixed. You mentioned our oversight. Our oversight as members of the Senate generally consists of when members are appointed to the Public Service Commission, we get to grill them and try to make sure that they're going to be people that are going to pay attention to the issues that we're concerned about. And many of us have raised these water issues for private water companies because I think in the past they've sort of looked at the cable companies, the electric companies, and, kind of the private water companies, since they're, not almost scarce in a lot of New York where we have public water. They don't do much of a focus on. And, we've come to the conclusion that the only real solution, and it may not be viable for all communities, is to try to make these systems public. Because we also talked earlier about how these private systems are not able to get any of the public funds that are coming in. And that's just the fact that in New York, our law is clear that, we cannot use public dollars to enrich a private company. And these private companies, they have the right to go in, and even when they build out a system and they put in, new capital programs, they automatically mark that up and get an automatic profit margin on some of those costs. So, I share your frustration, but we've come to the conclusion that public water is really the only way to deal with this.
Yeah, the town board has kicked this around. The bottom line is that the current owner of the company wants at least $1 million. And again, they're asbestos cement pipes with 15% asbestos content. We're a small town, it just doesn't really seem feasible to take it over. In the instance of this particular company, however, I really have no choice but to conclude that they're just a bad actor. The rate increases that were cited in the recent decisions included things like paying for the owner's health care and travel to visit the site where the company has infrastructure. I happen to know for a fact that he doesn't ever visit upstate. We're also billed for fire hydrants, which in my neighborhood do not provide fire protection. They're basically valves to flush the system. I could go on and on about water quality issues. I mean, water literally so corrosive that it ate the seals of a coffee maker within the warranty period. I could go on and on with site,
Well, maybe we need to look at areas like even the condemnation laws to see if there's maybe some things we could do at the state to tighten up some of these provisions to help communities such as yours move towards public water.
I think the existing oversight between DPS and DOH of private water companies just doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well, but I don't know how we fix that.
We feel like
making sure we have
victims.
good members on the commission.
Thank you. Senator Mayer?
Thank you. I want to follow up on Senator Gorin's question. Are you prepared to name the name of the company that is the one that is has these health issues which you can't have addressed?
Yeah, it's Hudson Valley Water Companies, and there are 5 in Ulster County, and that same company also owns a water system in New Jersey.
And in your efforts, to Senator Gorin's point, to get the Public Service Commission, which apparently said, we're not dealing with health, your county health department, what did they say?
We asked for an increased testing schedule. They kicked it over to the county attorneys, and the county attorney said no. It's just kind of been a circular, kind of trying to get things done, and we just keep getting sent in a circle.
Are there any tangible adverse health results that you have seen or people say as a result of what you think the health issues are?
I can tell you that I had profound health issues, a lot of gastrointestinal stuff that came up, and ultimately an autoimmune condition that I think is connected to some of the toxins I was exposed to in the water. And I'm told that when it comes to absorbing contaminants out of water, that it isn't necessarily by drinking the water that you experience those contaminants. It's through showering and things like that. So, I invested in a lot of, filtration and, stopped drinking the water. When I stopped drinking it, I instantly, felt a lot better. But there are people in the neighborhood who have, there's I can point to probably if I walk out my front door, there's at least 5 households where there's some form of cancer, all within eyesight,
Do most of the people who are customers use bottled drinking water?
Yes.
Yes. I think it's something that we have to address to the extent that there's a health issue that no one's willing to take on. That's just not acceptable to me. And I have private water companies as well, which we have these issues of rate increases, which are very frustrating, and I'm not satisfied with that. But when it gets to health, that's sort of a different priority. So I look forward to, I'm happy to follow up on that.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
Among the complaints that triggered the investigation of DPS, people in the neighborhood requested that a generator be installed on the pump house because there have been several times when the power outages lasted for more than a day,
Right.
sometimes as many as 4 days. And Public Service Commission actually noted in their increase that it would be too onerous for the company to install a generator, which when it comes to, power outages that last days, you're dealing with a sanitation issue, and then again, during a pandemic. So I just think that water supply is important.
Can I just ask, when was that? Because the Public Service Commission has upped its game, I would say, in the last period of time.
All right, so that rate increase, I believe, went into effect in early 2019,
Okay.
I believe.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Senator Tedisco.
Thank you. Supervisor Russo, what is the population of your town, New Baltimore, the population?
The entire town is approximately 3,200 people, actually, last.
3,200.
3,240 is
So
closer.
you have a very small municipality
Yes,
with a very large financial problem with your sublevel. Now, you have a $500,000 problem in terms of the safety of your water line.
right. And I think just to add to that, by law, only the users of a defined district are allowed to pay for those water needs.
Right.
I can't charge the people who live elsewhere within the town for the cost of that water repair.
So when these breaks take place, as far as I'm concerned, if they're small, they're medium, or large, they're essential. Because you're dealing with water, sometimes with the sewer breaks out in Montgomery County. Last couple of years, you had water sewage going into the Mohawk River. Was it in Amsterdam, the city itself, or just part of the county, Mayor?
City.
City itself.
Yeah.
And you had to go through a grant application process to get
Those
funding?
overflows into the river?
Yeah.
That's what you're referring to?
Well, the break that took place.
The DEC order has to do with those overflows to upgrade our plant.
Yeah, okay. So for a small municipality like yours, or really any municipality who has a very large project, I think If it's not an emergency, which right now it's not an imminent emergency, but it's fairly imminent when it's over 100 years of age, and a third of it broke down. So you're right in saying, I think there's a potential for it to have breaks on the other side and on your side. I think we need a process where you can make the case. We're a small municipality. There's 32 people. Where are we going to get $500,000? And there should be a grant process for that. But in terms of the Hinchy bill and the 24 of us who are sponsoring that, that's formula related. So CHIPS program, formula related. You're probably not going to get $500,000. But if that's your main problem, you could try to wait unless we had a grant program for the larger problem over 3, 4, or 5 years, and eventually you might have enough money with assistance from yourself to pay for that project. So you could not spend it in the first year, not spend it in the second year, I would hope, and not spend it in the third or fourth year maybe. And I'm not saying that's a good answer to that, but you have to solve that problem at some point. And I'd rather see if you can make an imminent case for a danger of this happening, because if it breaks down, it's going to cost you a lot more than a maintenance of it beforehand. It's just a fact. You have to dig up roads and things of that nature. There's ways to go below the sub-level without digging up roads in many instances with the new technology. So I think this sister program for CHIPS would be helpful for you in that sense. But I agree there should probably be a larger program for imminent danger of smaller municipalities or big projects like this.
Yeah, Senator, we found in the process, I didn't even know existed, but 2 predecessors ago, there was an evaluation of this pipe, and the replacement was going to cost $250,000 to $300,000. That was back in, I believe it was '09.
Yeah.
Here it's now $1 million. Of course, having to fix one when it breaks is going to be far more costly than taking care of it before it goes. Preventive maintenance. We all believe in that. But they didn't have the money then. It was part of the problem.
Yeah, pay me now or pay me later, which is...
Yeah, it's going to catch you.
The good senator mentioned that down there about inflation. You know, it's especially exacerbated now if it happens now during this particular period of all that work. But I think the CHIPS program would be of help to you. It's formula related, or the CHIPS 2 swap. But I think there's a different area for an imminent problem like yours with a small group of people which can make the case. I don't know how we could do that, but it was something we should look at. Thank you.
Agreed, thank you.
Senator Jordan.
Sure. So I guess I just want to hear from each of you a couple of questions that I have. Does your municipality have all of your water lines mapped, and do you know their size? And with that, do you know a rough estimate of how much it would cost to repair or to replace those lines? Now, I know you had said that yours were $20 million.
Yeah, we're actually beginning that process this coming year to map all of our underground pipes using a new piece of software. Right now, it's on every kind of fabric, paper you can imagine, sitting in our engineering offices. It's been a real maze, but we are beginning that process this year, and we hope to have computerized GPS mapping of all of our underground pipes done within the next 12 months.
So, basically, what have you had to look at all of this time?
Literally, it has been the memory of some very loyal water department workers who, when they dig a hole and find something, they write it down. They'll take the original map and say, oh, there's a valve here now, or there's a crossover here. It's literally been the efforts of human beings who understand our what's underground. There's over 100 miles of pipes in Amsterdam that go all over the place, and it's a real issue for us.
You know, our lines have not been well mapped. We find them when they break. In essence, I wish to say otherwise. We do have other lines. We actually have 3 water districts in our town. This was water district number 2 where the emergency was. They're both very small, very few users. In fact, our water district number 3 has 3 users. But that's new. That's a new system. It's only 25 years old versus the rest of the town. The 100-year-old pipe, we found out somewhere in the past, recent past. Actually, a homeowner has built a barn over the top of it. So You know, it wasn't known where it was for many years. They only discovered that about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And he's not going to move his barn, so, but if we replace it, we'd obviously put it elsewhere. Yeah, he's great.
I do have a map of our systems. It's pretty complete. I'm not sure exactly, the engineer that we're working with gave it to me, presented it to me as a gift. And it shows some of the places that we have done repairs, some of the places that we need to do repairs. But again, like Mayor said, it is a lot of just dedicated. We've had the same guy on our DPW crew for, I think he's 30 years in now. He doesn't like to get down in the holes anymore. We got younger guys to get down there, but he knows everything about the system and he's invaluable. We did do a little bit of camera work back in 2019, so those are things I can't unsee. But we have a fairly good map of our system. So we've been making these little steps towards being prepared to do what comes next.
Do you know the size of your pipes?
Most of them are 6 inches from what I understand, they explained to me. Those are the water pipes. I know that we have 10 miles worth of piping. I believe maybe the wastewater pipes are a little bigger, like 8 inches or 10 inches, but they're so old that they're not up to modern standards. But yeah, I actually did forward a digital copy of the map to Senator Hinchy's office, so if you guys want to take a look at that, she's got it, so.
And do you have an estimate as to what it would cost to replace or repair?
They're telling me for the mains, $250 a foot. I'm not going to try to do the math on 10 miles with $250 a foot in front of everyone. And storm drains, which we're also in need of, would be $150 a foot. And the recommendation is that we replace basically all of what's under there. It's a years-long project.
And then from the town of Hurley, do you?
We don't have municipal
Oh, that's right.
district.
That's right. All right, thank you. So I guess really, you need this work done, even if swaps were to be passed, right? You need to know the size of your pipes, how many miles worth you have, right? So I guess it's a matter of funding for you to get that information even.
Yeah. We did, like I said, we received some funding through the Clean Energy Communities Program through NYSERDA, so that was what we used to do some of that slip lining, and I believe we also got some funding from them when we put the cameras under the street. That was back in 2019. A colleague of mine has worked very closely with that. It's a project that's near and dear to his heart, so.
Yeah, this summer, we undertook several major projects. We have a major pump station, the main pump station in our city. We redid all the piping inside. It was, 50-something years old, and in order to do that, we had to turn valves off and under-pressurize the system. And some of the valves hadn't been turned off in 75 years. And again, it was old maps that we were using saying, well, we think the valve is here, and it wasn't. And having to dig that hole and go over here and dig that hole, and then turning that valve off and finding out, well, that doesn't do that, it does this. And it was really, it caused us an uproar. So we're very eager to do a better mapping of our underground system, and, once we have that, be able to make smarter, faster decisions, more efficient decisions on what holes we open up and what valves we shut off.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's a really important conversation about the challenges that our smaller municipalities are having in terms of water infrastructure, especially as we know we need to focus on making sure that everyone has access to clean water. It's really important to hear the challenges that all of you are facing. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your attention to this very much.
I'd like to call our third panel. That is Raina Cohen, State Policy Associate, New York League of Conservation Voters. Robert Hayes, Director of Clean Water, Environmental Advocates of New York. David Miller, Clean Water Program Coordinator, the Adirondack Council. Brian Smith, Associate Executive Director, Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Jeremy Cherson, Senior Manager of Government Affairs from Riverkeeper. And Jessica Otney-Mayer from New York Policy and Strategy Director, the Nature Conservancy.
Brian and I are down here.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder, we will have 5 minutes for testimony. We have your written testimony, so feel free to summarize. You don't need to read. And we will start first with Raina Cohen.
Hello, and thank you for allowing, thank you. Hi. Hello, and thank you for inviting me to testify today on behalf of the New York League of Conservation Voters, or NYLCV. A statewide environmental organization that is dedicated to fighting climate change, conserving land and water.
Could you get a little closer to the mic?
Oh, apologies. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. As I was saying, my name is Raina Cohen, and I am the State Policy Associate for the New York League of Conservation Voters, a statewide environmental organization that is dedicated to fighting climate change, conserving land and water, and protecting public health. NYLCV is also a proud member of the New York Clean Water Coalition, which brings together a wide range of water stakeholders, government agencies, environmental organizations, and environmental justice groups to determine New York State's clean water policy and funding needs. Thank you, Chair Hinchey, for the opportunity to testify today. The enormity of resources necessary to repair, maintain, and update New York State's water infrastructure, including drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater, is difficult to overstate. In 2008, the Departments of Health and Environmental Conservation placed the conservative combined cost estimate for drinking water and wastewater infrastructure alone at $74.9 billion, and even this number is lacking. As Rob Hayes, who is sitting here with me today, noted in his report, Untapped Potential, Building the Next Generation of Water Infrastructure, not only are these estimates over a decade old, they also fail to take into account water quality issues such as lead service line replacement and addressing emerging contaminants. Thus, the actual current costs are likely much higher. Despite the daunting scale of need, there are a number of crucial reforms that can be put into place now to address some of these urgent needs. First and foremost, it is key to have predictable funding at a meaningful level for clean water infrastructure. With the passage of the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, New York should expect to see $2.6 billion over the next 5 years in federal funding to address clean water infrastructure issues, including aging infrastructure, lead pipe remediation, and PFAS contamination. This is a critical cash infusion that will help the state take action, but sustained funding from the state is still needed. To that end, NYLCV hopes to see a continuation of the at least $1 billion in funding in the 2022-2023 state budget for the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, the allocation of which has been transformational in terms of New York's ability to invest in clean water infrastructure projects in previous years. NYLCV also recognizes the need for increased staffing at agencies tasked with administering CWIA funding. This will help to ensure that the full $1 billion can be allocated within the year. While additional predictable funding streams for clean water infrastructure are welcome, given how great the demand is, any additional funding streams created by the state should be supplemental to CWIA funding. There are a number of additional actions that can be taken to reform clean water infrastructure funding, in particular by supporting local governments in tackling existing needs and helping to prevent such an enormous backlog of projects in the future. One such action is investments in engineering planning grants for drinking water infrastructure, similar to those available for wastewater infrastructure. The engineering planning grants for wastewater infrastructure support local governments with funding to complete engineering reports often required for other grant and financing applications for wastewater. Establishing a parallel grant for drinking water infrastructure will similarly help local governments who may lack the in-house expertise, staffing, or budgetary resources to complete engineering reports or hire a contractor themselves. This will result in more complete applications for drinking water infrastructure grants and financing, in turn increasing the number of drinking water projects eligible for and awarded grant funding statewide. Additionally, clean water infrastructure funding consideration should include technical assistance for local governments. As AFR stated, local governments may have capacity, expertise, and resource limitations that inhibit their ability to access clean water infrastructure funding and support streams. Moreover, they may be unaware of these resources in the first place. Dedicated technical assistance for local governments can help bridge the gap between state and local agencies, helping local governments access available programs and funding to address clean water infrastructure needs. When designing formulas to distribute future clean water infrastructure funds, it is crucial to consider the scale of need not only in terms of, for instance, pipe mileage and width, but also in terms of community resources, the age of infrastructure, and other physical water infrastructure assets in the community. Grants and programs put in place should also be designed in a way that ensures that pipe sprawl is not incentivized. It is also crucial to include accountability mechanisms in the design and implementation of any future clean water infrastructure programs or policies to ensure taxpayer dollars are spent wisely and effectively. Finally, future funding should consider ways in which the state can incentivize investments in green infrastructure, particularly for stormwater and sewage challenges. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. We will go in order here. Next, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Senator Henchy and senators gathered today, including my own. My name is David Miller, and I'm the Clean Water Program Coordinator for the Adirondack Council, and I'll summarize my full testimony, which I provided for you. Adirondack's lakes, rivers, and streams are the lifeblood for residents and visitors and important to people across the state. However, these waters face threats by the lack of and faltering clean water infrastructure needs in the park. And those I will highlight today mainly in the wastewater and sewer system issues that we face. Over the past 6 years, the Adirondack Council has played a leadership role in documenting and advocating for clean water infrastructure needs of the Adirondack Park communities. The Adirondack Council was a founding member of the New York State Clean Water Infrastructure Coalition, and through its efforts with the leadership of the legislature and administration, the Clean Water Fund was established and annually funded over $3.5 billion for clean water since 2016. This historic program has helped finance wastewater and drinking water capital projects in New York State, as well as other related clean water initiatives. The Adirondack Council continues to work with the coalition supporting its 2022 platform to further fund and build on these efforts. Today, I'll focus on specific strides made in the Adirondacks and the challenges ahead. The Council during the past 5 years has published several reports documenting how these funds were used and the enormous needs ahead. One of those reports, most recent from 2020, I included for the record, which you have in the PDF format for the record. On successes to date, over the past 5 years, $58 million in New York State Clean Water grant funds have been approved under the Clean Water Fund for Adirondack communities, leveraging over $150 million in clean water infrastructure projects. Again, all of these projects are documented in this report, from Lake Placid to Lake George and beyond. However, equally important is there remains a greater need of hundreds of millions of dollars in clean water projects going forward to ensure our Adirondack waters are protected. So what are some of the challenges moving forward with small rural communities in the Adirondack Park? And even with these grant allocations, what challenges they face? These rural communities are in a hardship category. And for those of you who are familiar with hardship categories, the hardship category is estimated based on their limited tax base, their low user numbers, and below state median income levels. And hardship communities get zero interest or very low interest loans through the SRF program. They lack the local resources in many cases to move forward on a project, even under New York State's grant matching requirement. Let me give you one example, and there are many in the Adirondack Park. St. Armand's, which has 338 users for their sewer system, face a clean water project cost of over $10 million. Under New York State EFC grant requirements, there's no way they can raise 75% of those projects' costs locally in a fiscally responsible manner. This is just one example. Further examples from Elizabethtown, which project costs for a new sewer treatment plant has gone up from $9 million to $21 million, to Crown Point, and many others that we document in our testimony and reports. Therefore, we call upon the state to provide and bundle additional grant support from other sources, either state or federal, to close these funding gaps. These communities have limited resources and staff to make these projects viable within their fiscal means and cannot do it alone. The newly enacted federal infrastructure package provides an opportunity here, as well as other discretionary state funds. Already, state has stepped in using this approach for Lake George in 2020 with a supplemental grant of $9 million to make their project affordable for their community. These communities also have limited local resources and staff to plan and bring their projects forward. Even with 14 local engineering grants given to local communities over the past several years by New York State DEC in the Adirondacks, they need other resources to help them have the technical knowledge to apply for the funds to actually implement those projects. New York State, through the Environmental Facilities Corporation, needs to reinvest in their local technical assistance program. Through staffing changes and departures, and this is important, this program over the past year, we've been told by local government and discussions with them, is all but non-existent. It used to be the key element in local town officials to get the expertise and people at their board meetings to help them walk through the process, and the successful applications were due largely to this support. And in response to the hearing notice issue on ongoing maintenance of clean water systems, we agree local governments also have a challenge to meet those operational needs. And we're very open to ideas and working with you on ideas to provide those types of solutions and moving forward, especially for these communities, rural small communities that are in need, that have such limited resources. And the Adirondack Council supports additional funds from the Clean Water Fund to Adirondack communities for other categories, from engineering planning grants to septic system replacement program. Remember, in our rural communities, many folks are still on septic systems, road salt storage funds, watershed planning funds, and green infrastructure. I've run out of time, so just in conclusion, I'll say additional support should be based on where hardships exist in the Adirondacks and on the ability of local governments to finance these projects responsibly. In the end, the statewide magnitude of investing more in these hardship communities will have a very small impact on the larger amount of funds that are available throughout New York State. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Churson?
Hello, my name is Jeremy Churson, Senior Manager of Government Affairs for Riverkeeper. I want to thank you so much, Senator Hinchey and the rest of the senators, for having this forum today. Senator Hinchey was able to join Riverkeeper on a patrol boat twice this summer, and I want to invite the rest of you next year to please come out on the river and see it for yourselves. New York City alone needs $1.4 billion for clean water. The Hudson Valley outside of New York City, $941 million. Senate District 46, which I resided in Kingston, nearly $80 million, and that's in known needs. This does not include all the unknowns that are existing underneath the roads, that are currently degrading, the clay pipes that we don't know about. All that is not included. It's probably way more than those figures. I also wanted to talk about some of the little-known programs that might need attention. Combined sewer overflows are a powerful lead to powerful greenhouse gas emissions. In New York City alone, we did studies with Columbia University based on our sampling that showed that the overflows from rain events produce the emissions of around 41,000 cars. That's a lot of emissions from overflowing wastewater. It was identified in the interim State Climate Action Council plan as something that needed to be accounted for. We currently don't know the extent of emissions from combined sewer overflows, and that's something that the state urgently needs to get a grip on. And if we do so, we might be able to leverage additional federal funds for mitigating greenhouse gases in addition to water infrastructure. Part of the emissions that comes from CSOs is a result of inflow and infiltration, which you heard from some of the local governments, that if we address some of this issue, we can reduce the amount of stormwater entering the system and lower the overall costs of treatment and replacing system components. There's another important program that could address the inflow and infiltration problem. This is the Engineering Planning Grant Program. It is a highly effective program. It has funded over 463 projects across the state and leveraged over $700 million in funds. It requires a 20% local match, and that may be hard for small rural communities and other communities to be able to afford, although they can use in-kind services to count towards that. I believe that the EPG program should be expanded to help more communities take advantage of the grant program. Right now, it's at $10 million, which seems rather small when there's so many communities that need the funds to be able to do the base level planning and engineering in order to even make the application to get in the running for the available funds. There's another new program called the Asset Management Program. It's underfunded and underappreciated. DEC selected 10 communities in 2015 with $3 million for this asset management program. 80 communities applied for it. In September, the governor released a $10 million program, elevating it from a pilot program to a full-on program. And I believe that this should be expanded so more communities can get ahead of water main breaks and potential problems and can reduce very expensive costs in the future when they have to deal with emergency breaks. If they can get ahead of that and plan, the EPA suggests that they can significantly decrease their costs. And again, $10 million is a very small amount for the size of the state and the amount of communities that may need this funding. And then thirdly, I'd like to offer Riverkeeper support for S3968A, the SWAP program. I think it's a great idea. The CHIPS program works really well. You heard from local governments earlier how much they desire for that program, and we'd be happy to support it in the next session and hope to see it move forward, and would be happy to speak to Assembly colleagues about the program as well. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hayes.
Just a little higher. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Hayes, and I'm the Director of Clean Water with Environmental Advocates New York. EANY is a statewide organization based in Albany and committed to advancing policies that protect public health and further environmental justice. I really appreciate the opportunity to testify today. Thanks, Senator Hinchey, especially for organizing this really critical forum on how we repair, replace, and upgrade our state's water infrastructure. New York's drinking water and wastewater infrastructure is aging and crumbling, and it is putting clean water and public health at risk. Just a few days ago, actually, there was a major water or sewer line break that occurred just a few blocks from the building that we are sitting in right now. There's probably still some street closures that are occurring right by the Legislative Office building right now. And there's a photo of some of the work that was done a couple of days ago included in my testimony. And that really speaks to the kind of the scale of the problem that we're facing here that my colleagues are just talking about so eloquently. There is such an enormous need to fix our pipes across the state. And it is because of the enormity of that need that we have been so grateful and appreciative of the state legislature's efforts in recent years to invest in water infrastructure funding. First with the creation of the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act in 2015, also known as the WIA program, and then to dramatically expand that in 2017 with the creation of the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. And one thing that I want to cover today is to really convey to you that those appropriations that you've been putting in the state budget the last several years have been reaching communities and have been benefiting clean water across the state. Environmental Advocates New York is especially committed to kind of tracking and evaluating the WIA program through a series of reports that we create titled these Untapped Potential Reports. Each grant cycle, we submit a Freedom of Information Law request to EFC to access data on the project applications submitted by local governments for WIA funding. Our goal is to determine whether New York is succeeding at getting WIA grants out the door, and whether the program's funding is adequate to meet the demand from local governments eager to jumpstart clean water initiatives. In this past month, we just produced our latest installment titled Building the Next Generation of Water Infrastructure. And I can go through some of the top lines of the report during this testimony right now, and it is also attached to my written testimony in case more details are useful and of interest to the committee. I can also note certainly too that we have really localized granular data on how this program might have benefited your districts or local governments in your communities and where outstanding needs may still be. But in terms of some of those top line numbers, in many ways, WIA has been a great success. Between 2015 and 2019, it is awarded over $1 billion to local governments across the state, helping to jumpstart over 600 projects in every single county outside of New York City, in communities large and small. The geographic reach has really been pretty impressive. But in spite of that success, what we have seen year after year is that WIA does not have sufficient funding to fund all of the shovel-ready projects that are submitted to it every single year. In 2019 alone, there were 83 shovel-ready projects that didn't get the funding that they need, and that meant the local governments probably had to put a lot of them on hold. And I think that really shows the need for increased investment in water infrastructure going forward. It's why environmental advocates, like many of our colleagues, are calling for $1 billion in funding for the Clean Water Infrastructure Act in this upcoming budget. That $1 billion number is really key too, because the initial kind of $2.5 billion 5-year allocation from 2017, we reached the end of that in 2021. And so going forward, the legislature, the governor, these past several years have just been putting $500 million in the budget for the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. But to keep the kind of funding level we've had over the last several years, $1 billion is going to be necessary going forward. And can certainly touch on that in more detail, maybe in some follow-up questions. I've also really appreciated the conversation during this forum about Senator Hinchy's bill, S3968A, to create a kind of CHIPS-like program for water. We're certainly very open to proposals to make sure that local governments can access the funding that they need to address their water infrastructure needs. We do have some concerns about the proposal and how it's structured, and would be happy to kind of engage in discussion of how to make sure that the bill and the program would function as efficiently and equitably as possible. Some of the concerns that we have are around the funding distribution formula in the bill. Distributing funding based on total pipe miles and widths likely wouldn't actually achieve a really equitable and just distribution of resources. There are many other indicators that go into how much a local government might need for water infrastructure funding. The age of the infrastructure, the wealth of the community, other physical assets like treatment plants and pumps and things like that. And so we really want to see that addressed holistically to make sure we're achieving a really equitable distribution of resources. There were some other comments about the bill in my testimony, but I know I'm over time. So just we'll keep it at that, and thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Again, my name is Brian Smith. I'm the Associate Executive Director at Citizens Campaign for the Environment, and I appreciate all the senators being here today to listen to our testimony. The issue of water infrastructure is a major priority for Citizens Campaign for the Environment. A couple of my colleagues have mentioned a coalition that we work with and that we lead that has all the folks here at the table, but also the wastewater treatment operators, the drinking water suppliers. Every year we come together and develop a list of issues and solutions to water quality challenges that we all agree upon, and deliver those to the legislature, and we'll be delivering those on Monday. More to come on that. As has been said, obviously our water infrastructure needs in the state are massive. The DEC and DOH's estimate of $80 billion over the next 20 years is of course dated, but it's also very conservative because it does not include things like treating drinking water for emerging contaminants, source water protection, lead service line replacement, harmful algal bloom response and prevention, climate resilient infrastructure, and more. So in addition to funding that Clean Water Infrastructure Act at $1 billion annually, we do support reform that would allow for municipalities to get that regular ongoing funding to do operations and management. We think that's very important. As the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we need to ensure that any program that's developed to provide communities with recurring funding for O&M really gets the most bang for the buck, advances justice and equity, and provides maximum environmental benefits. So there's some key principles we think should be part of a policy like this. First and foremost, the investments made should be made based on need. Rob said it, that pipe size and width and main size should be part of the criteria, but that doesn't account for communities that may have a lot of pipes but don't have an ability to pay. Financial hardship should be part of the criteria as well. We also support investing in green infrastructure. Of course, we support maintaining, fixing our traditional gray infrastructure, the pipes, the valves, the pumps, but green infrastructure, there are also opportunities to utilize this to address stormwater issues in a cost-effective manner while also providing significant co-benefits to communities. Green infrastructure such as rain gardens, tree plantings, green roofs, permeable pavement, they're designed to capture and divert stormwater to prevent it from entering storm sewers at peak times. Green infrastructure is often a less expensive and more effective solution to reduce inflow that leads to sewage overflows and the environmental degradation that comes with them. So we believe that to maintain a system properly, to protect the environment, green infrastructure needs to be a tool in the toolbox for operations and management. Also want to flag that when it comes to O&M, we believe strongly that we need to support treatment of drinking water for emerging contaminants. We're grateful that the state has stepped up and adopted some of the strongest drinking water standards in the nation for things like PFOA, PFOS, and 1,4-dioxane. It's critical to protecting public health, and we have to move forward with it. But we know it also comes with a significant cost, not just to install this technology, but to provide the maintenance over the long term. According to the Department of Health, the systems needed to treat for 1,4-dioxane on average will cost $150,000 per year just in annual maintenance costs. For the systems needed to treat for PFOA and PFOS, maintenance costs are estimated at $25,000 a year for small systems, this is those below 3,300. Medium systems, it's $125,000 a year, and larger systems serving more than 10,000 is $725,000 a year. So these are significant costs of operation and management every year on top of the very significant cost of installing the technology in the first place. Skip through some of this. Again, I want to reiterate the fact that this should supplement, not supplant, major investments in the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. We strongly support providing an additional $1 billion in the Clean Water Infrastructure Act with additional complementary funding provided for water infrastructure O&M. I do want to mention the urgency of getting this policy done. I know that's been around for a while, but we feel like now is the time to do it, not just because of the environmental, public health, economic benefits of upgrading and fixing our sewage infrastructure, but the amount of money coming from the federal government. The federal bipartisan infrastructure package is providing supplemental funding of additional $55 billion in clean water infrastructure over the next 5 years. And as Raina said earlier, that's a few billion dollars for New York State. We need to position ourselves to be able to make the most of this funding. And funding provided through this program can provide that leverage and matching to bring the maximum amount of dollars to local governments. So we're urging the legislature to act as soon as possible. And I know my time is running out. I'll just mention that, again, I will forward you the shared priorities document, and in that was a couple of items that were already mentioned, and I'll just flag those quickly. It's technical assistance for local governments, very, very important, as well as the planning engineering grants for drinking water infrastructure. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Animar.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Otney-Mahar, and I'm the Policy and Strategy Director for the Nature Conservancy here in New York, and I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you, Senator Hinchey, for holding this forum, and to so many of you who have been advocates for clean water for so long. Really wonderful to be with you all in person today. The Nature Conservancy is a global environmental not-for-profit, but we actually have our roots here right in New York. And we're really focused on thinking about how we manage our water holistically from source to tap, and then from tap to where it goes after we use it. So we're working in a lot of communities to reduce pollution into our waterways, from working with the agricultural community in places like the Finger Lakes, to working with local governments on Long Island in Senator Gorin's district to improve the water quality through changing out septic systems, as well as making large repairs to big, great infrastructure and pipes like the ones we're talking about today. So I wanted to start out by thanking you all for really focusing on this issue in a bipartisan way, for so many years now and creating billions of dollars in funding to help communities work on these issues. And also to urge you to keep going. I want to really thank my partners here. We're really proud to be working with these and so many other organizations on these issues, and echo all of the things that they've suggested. I did want to just note a couple of things from my testimony. You know, we heard a lot today about how hard it is for local government officials to not only tap into funding, but really to be working with the myriad of different state agencies that manage water. I don't know what the exact solution to that is. It must be one heck of an omnibus bill, but certainly thinking a little bit about ideas to help communities navigate water management with the state and the state manage water in a more holistic way is something we're really interested in furthering a conversation about. There used to be a Water Resources Commission in the state. You know, there's a lot of work that could be done thinking about these issues, especially with the intersection of climate change and the flooding issues that have been mentioned. So we're really interested in talking more about those things. I will also say an area that often gets overlooked because we're so focused on pipes and big systems is our septic systems. And we have highly populated areas like Suffolk County on Long Island where we have tons of homes on septic systems. And we need to ensure that policies aimed at protecting water quality and upgrading water infrastructure are also able to be used by counties like Suffolk and towns in places like the Adirondacks and the Finger Lakes and the Thousand Islands to help homeowners upgrade. So in some places, we're still replacing cesspools, which is, there's no treatment there, but even traditional septic systems don't do enough to remove pollution from water. And so creating funding to help homeowners upgrade their septic systems to systems that remove pollution from the water will really make a huge improvement and make sure that our beaches and bays and harbors are available to us for swimming and fishing and all of the benefits, as well as keep our drinking water clean in areas where we have groundwater. So that's one issue I wanted to make sure that we really brought up. Another one, you know, again, we're supportive of all of the funding. I'm not going to repeat for the 17th time what you've all heard. Another thing you should consider, though, is how we can help communities create revenue outside the property tax base to leverage state and federal funds, and even in some cases pay for some of the planning and the engineering. And what a number of communities on Long Island have done through the Peconic, or the East End, Community Preservation Fund, is create local funding that they can use then to tap in and leverage for both conservation and green infrastructure, preventing pollution at the source, but also 20% of that funding now is eligible to go to projects that improve water quality. And so that might be a strategy that the legislature wants to take another look at in adopting along with all of these capital programs. And then finally, I will just put a quick plug in for the Bond Act, which should be on the ballot in November. It's very exciting. And there's lots of funding categories in the Bond Act for not only water infrastructure, which would augment the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act and the Environmental Protection Fund, but also for things like stormwater systems and municipal and agricultural stormwater pollution prevention, so protecting water again at the source. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I'll just kind of throw it an open question here to the group. With the successful passage of the ballot proposition, the second ballot proposition for a right to clean water amongst clean air and a healthful environment, can you or someone just address how the needs right now don't necessarily, maybe they don't align with that, or if they don't, or what we need to do to make sure that we are securing and really following through as a state on that now constitutional amendment with what kind of investment we need to use for clean water infrastructure?
Well, I'll just say for the Adirondacks, and I'll just speak of wastewater at this stage and ensure that the waters and streams and lakes of the Adirondacks are clean. You're talking about several $100 million of clean water infrastructure needs through sewer line and pipes, through inflow and infiltration linkages, to wastewater treatment plants, to phosphorus removal now for Lake Champlain with increased requirements, to a host of other needs that 25 to 26 communities cannot pay on their own, and that's today. And we have to understand that these needs are not just today, they're tomorrow and the next day and the next month and the next year and 5 years down the line. Because infrastructure needs to be maintained, just like the oil in your car needs to be changed and tires have to be replaced. And this is an ongoing investment that these communities critically need to meet that goal in the Constitution.
I can also, I'll move this a little closer. I can also mention quickly, and this is something my colleague flagged a little earlier, on the subject of emerging contaminants in drinking water. The state recently has established new drinking water standards for 3 toxic chemicals, PFOA, PFOS, and 1,4-dioxane. But I think with the passage of the new amendment, the state will have to be a lot more proactive in addressing other emerging contaminants in drinking water as well. There are many other PFAS chemicals showing up in our drinking water right now that are just as harmful as PFOA and PFOS. As hopefully this amendment will spur greater protections, more drinking water standards for these other emerging contaminants, that's going to cause water utilities to face increased need to establish filtration technology to maintain it over time. So as hopefully the constitutional amendment spurs greater drinking water protections for New Yorkers, there'll be that need for a subsequent increase in the amount of resources that the state is putting forward to make sure that we can put in place the infrastructure we need to meet those protections.
Oh, I was just going to say, nature is telling us that that amendment is aspirational and we're not there right now. And that is the motivation that we need and the science that we need to keep looking to see, what more, right? In New York State, 1/3 of our rivers and streams and 92% of our estuaries are impaired. So, this is a drinking water issue for us people, and it's also taking away from our ability to thrive as a community, our fishermen and women, the people who spend their lives in the recreational industry, people who rely on these natural resources for a livelihood, in addition to obviously the water we drink, which gets the most attention, and rightly so. What our environment is telling us is that we have not met the call of being able to provide healthy water and air and a healthy environment for everyone yet. And so again, thank you for focusing on this because much work is still needed.
I mean, one aspect and lens that you can look at the amendment through is the apportion of green infrastructure and street trees and rain gardens and how they're distributed. I think there's a gap, in looking at redlining and historic zoning practices and seeing where has state and federal and even local funding gone towards those types of projects and which communities benefit from those. We don't have a holistic view of what that looks like. If we did, we might be able to figure out, well, take Kingston, for example. Let's say Uptown has a whole lot of green infrastructure, street trees. It's beautiful. But maybe Midtown has missed out on those opportunities and isn't getting the attention that other more affluent parts of the community are getting. And that's something that ties right back to the amendment, having a right to clean air, clean water. Having street trees on your block not only has been shown to reduce crime, it has been shown to reduce rates of asthma. It reduces the heat island effect, so communities are cooler, and all other benefits that go along with it. And we don't necessarily know the distribution of funding that has gone towards those types of projects and which communities benefit and which communities miss out on it.
Thank you. Senator May?
Yeah, thank you. Just following up on that, I wanted to say I have a friend who was going through adopting a child, and one of the questions on the screening was, do you live on a tree-lined street? And which seemed like a way to kind of do almost racial profiling in the way we set up our green infrastructure. I wanted to follow up with what you said earlier about CSOs and greenhouse gas emissions. I assume that means it's untreated sewage that's causing methane emissions. Is that how that's happening?
Yes, it's the untreated sewage during rain events, and because we're getting more increased participation, 2021 was the most intense precipitation we had seen in the Hudson Valley, and some of our water quality tests on the Hudson River and its tributaries showed the worst water quality in about a decade of our testing of any year. And so that tells us that the inflow and infiltration and the water that's coming down is entirely bypassing the system and dumping raw sewage right into the river where microbes break down the methane and release them into the atmosphere.
Yeah, thank you. But are we also testing the actual systems, the wastewater treatment systems for greenhouse gas emissions too? Are they doing a good job? Do we know?
I don't know, maybe someone knows.
Well, I know that anecdotally, from the conversations we've had in coalition with water treatment system operators, they're making huge gains in things like energy efficiency when they're using and accessing these funds to do upgrades. So, they're realizing big benefits in the cost of their operation from an energy perspective, in addition to obviously the ability to clean the water. So I don't have data on, the monitoring of that, but certainly they're realizing gains when they do those upgrades, which leads one to believe that an older system obviously churns through more energy.
Stony Brook University is doing work on methane capture and putting it into renewable natural gas that I'm aware of, and wastewater treatment plants are one of the areas. Of course, farming is another area. But turning that gas, which is 85 times more potent than CO in greenhouse gas emission impacts on climate change, is an important element moving forward. And those wastewater treatment plants that reuse that and capture that gas then put it back into electricity for their own facility.
Right.
Oh, and I was going to say, Assemblywoman Anna Kellis actually taught me a lot about anaerobic digesters in wastewater on a meeting we had a few weeks ago. And there's a facility in Newtown Creek in Brooklyn that has the promise of turning the sludge into biogas and then using that energy to further reduce the energy costs of the whole system. But Con Ed is behind on implementing it by years and way over cost. So we need to also find ways to reduce the costs of that process and speed it up, and I'm hoping that's something that the Climate Action Council might be able to figure out with the help of the state legislature.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Smith, I just wanted to follow up. You made a comment that green infrastructure is often less expensive as a way of dealing with water infrastructure issues. I'm not sure that's what the experience of Onondaga County has borne out, but I hope there are data that show that that's true. And certainly in the context of the climate action plan, it seems like if we can factor in the savings on greenhouse gas emissions, that might
Yeah, I think when you look
jumpstart
at
more green infrastructure.
Yeah, when you look at it holistically, you look at the climate impacts that would absolutely have an impact. I don't have, specific statistics on that, but I can see, there's a number of different pilot projects that have been out there, examples. I'm coming here from the city of Buffalo today, and we were under a consent years ago to address our CSO problem, and there was talk of having to separate the system, and it's a massively expensive process to separate this old system from 100 years ago. But instead, the city moved forward with a very robust green infrastructure program for a much lower cost than they would have had to do for separating the system. And it's going to be for providing significant co-benefits to the community while doing it cheaper, reducing that inflow into the system, but also employing folks to do the green infrastructure, the maintenance. So it's workforce development. It's providing, beautifying neighborhoods, providing habitat for wildlife in the communities. So, I think there are a number of examples where communities were able to address their problems and could say that they could do it cheaper with green infrastructure.
Right.
I can
Coming
give
out
you an
of the
example.
sustainability world, I really want us to be able to take that holistic look and make sure we're taking account of all the co-benefits too. We can't, in the government silos that we operate in, that's sometimes hard to do.
I can
My
give you an
time is
example.
up, but
Would you like in Lake Placid, as you're all familiar with Lake Placid, 4 or 5 years ago when the technical assistant program was up and running in full steam, and they have a visionary mayor, Mayor Randall, up there in Lake Placid. They went forward to do comprehensive planning on their wastewater treatment plant, their sewer lines. Now, all of you have been in Main Street, you know Main Street. They had to totally dig up Main Street to replace the sewer lines in that area. At the same time, they applied for green infrastructure grants because of the CSOs going into Mirror Lake, which are harmful to Mirror Lake and Lake Placid. And they now are almost completion of all these projects, but they bundled the grants. They had technical assistance from EFC. They went to different funding streams, and you won't recognize Main Street in the next 6 to 9 months because it'll be trees, green areas, move the parking lot away from the side of Mirror Lake and so forth. So there are ways to do it, but communities need enormous help and guidance to get there.
Thank you.
And I don't think we have any other, oh, great, Senator Mayor.
I do. I have a few questions. One is, are any of you that represent statewide groups able to say what the cost to the city of New York, which we haven't discussed at all, would be to upgrade or improve their water system? Do any of you know the number? Or is there someone who speaks for the needs of the city of New York? I'd feel bad if we did not mention the largest city in the state in this conversation.
Well, the known costs to New York City are at least $1.4 billion. That's what we know. It's arguably much higher, and one of the issues we have with New York City is they are using 1986 EPA water quality standards. And they are under an EPA consent order to improve water quality, which means investing in their wastewater system. Right. But because they use 1986 standards instead of the 2012 standards, they are able to get away with a lower level of investment. And that is something that Riverkeeper, along with coalitions of organizations, have been trying to get addressed. And DEC actually has a petition in front of them that they have to approve that would allow New York City to continue to use those 1986 standards.
Thank you, that's helpful. Is that referenced in your testimony?
The cost
The
is,
cost
but I
is-
can send more information on the
Thank you.
on the standards.
I'd appreciate it. The second is, on this issue of untreated sewage, it's another byproduct of the flooding that happened in Ida and other storms. To the best of my knowledge, some of the wastewater treatment plants in Westchester discharged raw sewage for a period of time because flooding overwhelmed the wastewater treatment plant. So that was discharged there, plus untreated sewage was all over people's basements throughout my district. So I do think the point of including it in the conversation is extremely important, and we ought not to presume that we live in a society where sewage doesn't end up in people's houses. It did. And the last thing is, no one has mentioned whether other states have a better model for getting money out the door or working with localities to meet these enormous costs, as well as the additional burdens of planning and engineering that you've identified. Is there any state that you could point to as a better model of doing what we're trying to talk about here? Any of you?
I can only say that New York State, if not the highest, is probably among the highest in clean water grant infrastructure direct payments to municipalities versus just loans. Very limited is done in Connecticut or Massachusetts. They mostly rely on the SRF program for zero interest loans. They have different clean water grant projects, but not at the scale New York State does. Now, that's not to say that New York State hasn't figured out the right way, as we've discussed,
Right.
on how to coordinate, how to implement, how to make it feasible for local communities to take advantage of these programs.
I just would like to credit my colleague, Assemblyman Steve Otis, who was the driver of this.
Steve
when I
Otis
was
is a
in the
hero.
Assembly, coming out of his time being a mayor in local government, where he knew governments needed it. But I just wondered, so does everyone agree New York is sort of the model for all its flaws?
I think that's right, and I think it's telling that, the amount of money that New York is set to get for year one from the bipartisan infrastructure bill for water infrastructure, I think is about $428 million. And I think it's really telling that over the last several years, New York State has been putting more money than that, $500 million in each budget since 2019, on top of the great investment of the $2.5 billion from 2017. So I think it's really telling that, New York State is even ahead of the ball from the feds in terms of getting the amount of funding for these programs forward. So yeah, I'd agree with a lot of what Dave said.
Yeah, we're definitely the model. Other water keepers in other states look to us with envy, although there's a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll just say it's largely also because we have one of the biggest needs in the nation. So, by formula, we get the most money, I believe, from the SRF program. So I think it's fitting that we have, the biggest need, we invest the most.
And we're going to need to protect that formula at 11. We get 11% of the formula. Now that we're losing a congressional seat in the future, we're all going to have to work to protect that 11%.
And I'll also just say, again, in thinking about not just the municipal pipe systems, but the septic systems and some of these issues, it's not just small communities either. We're talking about Suffolk County, right? We have been doing a lot of educating and having a lot of conversations with members of Congress about how to make the tax structure as supportive as possible for individuals who do participate in those programs, as well as working to export that knowledge. Cape Cod was a little bit ahead of us in some of these programs, but we're now talking to other places, including Hawaii, about how to address and operationalize public funding to help individuals as a whole community area upgrade wastewater treatment that's on site. And so that's another way in which New York is really using this funding to lead. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And we have our fourth and final panel today. Please come down. Daniel Ortega, Community Affairs Director, Operating Engineers, Local 825. Martin Aman, representing New York Section American Water Works Association. Timothy Murphy, representing New York Water Environment Association, Incorporated. And Martin Daly, Director of Water Quality Programs, Capital District Regional Planning Commission. Thank you, absolutely. Thank you very much. All right, to get started here, reminder, we have all the testimony, so feel free to summarize. We will start with Dan Ortega.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Ortega. I work for the Engineer Labor Employee Cooperative Elect 825. We are the labor management fund for the operating engineers, Local 825. We represent over 8,500 union members and 1,000 signatory contractors. Our territory includes the entire state of New Jersey and 5 counties in the state of New York, Delaware, Orange, Rockland, Sullivan, and Ulster County. At first, I want to say thank you to Senator Hinchy for giving us the opportunity to participate here today. Local 825 members have first-hand knowledge of the benefits construction has in our communities, and our members are exceptionally skilled in cranes, demolition, paving, environmental remediation, heavy highway, water, sewage, and energy infrastructure. We're not solely about jobs. Our members do not just work here. There is 1,500 of our members who live in the state of New York, and they raise their families here. And they serve the communities with pride and professionalism. And they want to bring that professionalism to the construction projects, particularly in water that we are all discussing here today. In order for New York to remain economically competitive and a great place to live, we need responsible water infrastructure improvements and development. This infrastructure should be built by the same people who will benefit from its long-term success. Moreover, commercial, manufacturing, as well as people seek areas to settle with dependable transportation, energy, and water infrastructure. Investing in these projects will offer ample and reliable water resources that are essential for our economic and population growth. Many times when having conversations with local officials, I have realized that many of them do not have the knowledge that there are significant amount of grants and money available through the state of New York for them to access, particularly in water resources. I think that the state, both at every single level, both at the agency, the executive, and the legislative branch, and ourselves as members of the community who are always talking to them, need to do a better job at communicating what the grants are available and how much money it's there for them to access. Another thing that I have seen is the inability by many municipalities to access the money, because a lot of the grants come with a 50-50 match, and many times they don't have the money to do the match. They have to waste significant amount of time to basically save the money to get there, and that precludes them from moving this project faster. One of our recommendations will be to try to either create a new formula and or to tweak a little bit the way how these grants are given. We understand that the state wants to have the municipalities to have a skin in the game and that they are equal participants and partners on these projects. But we also understand that a lot of the times these things are not done just because people don't have the initial money to start the projects. Another thing that we have seen that some municipalities have been trying to look into, and there hasn't been a lot of success, is to have intergovernment agreements where perhaps the municipality may own the land and the county can come in and actually run the project. But they have not been able to come in together to actually partner, whether there is not direct involvement, or there is no willingness for the municipalities, or there's just not ability, because once the project goes to the state starts looking at us as well. If the town owns the land, why is the county being involved, or vice versa? So we need to also look at little things like that in order to facilitate a lot of these projects to move forward. Regardless of the new policies, laws, or regulations we put into place, we also need to make sure that we have and we continue to have prevailing wages attached to all of these projects. Too often, these type of projects end up going to unscrupulous contractors who have questionable safety records. These practices, among other things, lower productivity and deprive apprenticeship training opportunities to many of the communities that we try to serve. Again, thank you, and I hope that this is a opening and a good opportunity to start talking about how do we move forward with water infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Mr. Amon?
Thank you, Senator Hinchey, and thank you for the senators that have hung in there with us today. A little disappointed. I'm hopeful that the other senators, even the ones that were here earlier today, can hear our messages. A lot of great testimony today, a lot of very interesting perspectives. I'm hard pressed to disagree with anything that we've heard today. I think it all enters into the challenge we have to best use the funding that's available through federal, state resources, whatever mechanism we use to get there. And when we prepared our testimony, really racked our brains. So I worked around our Water Utility Council, and we're represented geographically around the state. We've got great people in your area, Senator Hinchey, Judy Hansen, been in the industry forever. She's boots on the ground. She understands what's emerging. In the Capital District, we're strongly represented. We link strongly with Long Island Water Council. They're great people there. They've got some real challenges with the forever chemicals and emerging contaminants that some of us that are lake supplied, surface water supplied, don't have to deal with. So we've got a unique configuration of utility representatives that are both large and small. We're hearing the needs of all. I think we're uniquely poised to really help the Senate. Hopefully we get the Assembly on board with key considerations like the CHIP style funding. It's a very interesting idea and maybe one of the most highly supported and likely to move quickest avenues. So we spent a lot of time in our preparing our testimony looking at the existing funding mechanisms, primarily through the state revolving fund as administered through EFC and New York State Department of Health. They've done a lot of great things. Back in 2018, I had an opportunity to go to Washington as part of an EPA/AWWA session to look at the drinking water state revolving fund program around the country. New York State stacks up very well. We leverage the funds. There are states like Mississippi that don't even give away all their dollars. They can't can't find takers for the funds. We certainly don't face that here, so there's a lot good to be said, and our testimony isn't meant to knock in any way the folks at EFC and DOH. I do want to take the opportunity to double down on the request from Department of Health for funding and other types of assistance. And I want to add to that DEC. On the wastewater side, retirements are running rampant. We're losing our best people that are most knowledgeable. We need to reinforce the ranks there, to review plans, to help prioritize, to work with the funding mechanisms. And I'm going to add EFC into the mix here too, because they're great people, but you know, the need today is greater than it's ever been. And we're sitting, our authority, speaking a little bit from a personal perspective, we've got a large regional wastewater project we're building. We're decommissioning 4 old plants, building 1 new one, and it's had a lot of support, funding and otherwise, but it's been sitting, we're into our 5th month waiting for review comments. We can't get it to bid. And, you know, that I know that the forces are stressed right now. We need help there, you know. So a couple of other ancillary items I want the senators to be aware of that are going to affect the viability and the effectiveness of the funding. This supply chain shortage that we're all hearing about nationwide, it has hit the water sector big time. To replace lead pipe, you got to have pipe. To replace water mains, we bid, you know, it's affecting us in availability and price. We recently bid 12-inch PVC pipe that a year and a half ago, we're buying $11 a foot. It's over $30 a foot. My fear is, no matter how effective we are in using these funds that are available, if we can't contain costs and if we can't somehow overcome some of the supply challenges that we have, even with the funding, we'll be back to pre-pandemic levels, and there's still going to be a huge gap. So we got to work on that. I don't know if it's been raised to the awareness of many in New York State, but nationwide, there have been some very critical concerns over chemical shortages. Our most critical chemicals for water treatment, chlorine. Many of the larger utilities in New York State have force majeure letters that they got, basically saying we can't honor your contract. Pricing is going up tremendously. That's bad enough, but what happens the day when we don't have tankers of chlorine? We can't disinfect the water and deliver it through the systems that we're working so hard to bring up. So I would have liked to directly address some of the questions that came up earlier about stretching funding into rural areas where there is no infrastructure. This idea of clean water being a right, it's caused a lot of consternation on our end because I'm familiar with expanding into rural Wayne County where the going rate now is about $1,400 a year, where you have 40 homes to the mile. What do you do with that remote home that's 3 more miles out, has terrible water, but you know, on whose back are we going to get the water out there? So, you know, it's a challenge. I think our utilities are up for the challenge, but it's a very real issue. So, in closing, I want to strongly, and I know Brian Smith advocated to take legislative action as soon as possible. Can I ask that you please consider taking enough time to see where the federal funding details finalize? What we're going to do in New York State is going to be supplemental to that. I don't know how, but you know, for us to best use the funds in New York, we need to understand what's coming on the federal level. So our utility council, New York section of American Water Works, would like to work with this group or a subgroup to help better define the priorities. We're hearing from all the utilities. You heard testimony from several today on their direct costs and their specific problems and issues. That story goes on and on throughout this state, and somebody's got to help sort that out. We'd like to be a part of that. So at the very least, when the summation of today's forum comes together, can you give us a chance to look through that? Can I run it by our Water Utility Council and get some answers back to you on questions that remain, some feedback? And I certainly am willing, and our group is willing. They can do it regionally. In the Capital District, we got great people. We've got great people on the west end of the state. In your area, Senator Hinchy, you can work with them directly. We'll deliver a common message. And, you know, we're the ones with boots on the ground.
Thank you.
We're the ones that are going to take the heat for the rate increases and have to address the omissions that inevitably occur when funding is limited, so.
Well, I think that's what we're all trying to do here, right, is figure out, we recognize that there's an issue. We also recognize that clean water is a right. And so we have to work together to figure out how we can get clean water and ensure that everybody in the state of New York has clean water. And so we're happy to, that's why we're here today on our fact-finding mission to do that and to figure out the best pathway forward, with the understanding too that the federal government is now finally, for the first time in a very long time, paying attention to infrastructure as well. So we will all be working together to make sure that we can do that and get to the goal that we need to be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy?
Yes. Good morning, or good afternoon, Senator Hinchey. I thought we were going to be here in the morning. And represent.
Say good night.
I'll say that at the end. And representatives of the committee. May I first say, nothing has had more of an impact on improving water quality for our receiving streams than in the past 50 years than our wastewater treatment plants. Okay, there was a tremendous investment in wastewater treatment plants, and it's had remarkable effect on our receiving streams. So with that, my name is Timothy Murphy, and I'm speaking on behalf of the New York Water Environment Association, or NYWEA. In a professional capacity, I am the retired executive director of the Albany County Water Purification District and serve part-time as a project developer for the district. I've been a member of NYWEA for a number of years. NYWEA is a member association of the Water Environment Federation, the leading international organization dedicated to the wastewater industry. As a nonprofit professional association, NYWEA members represent local and state government officials, academics, engineers, scientists, and other interested professionals across the state who are involved in water quality management. We are keenly aware of the fiscal challenges faced by our local governments attempting to finance clean water infrastructure. State and local government money accounts for 96% of the total water and wastewater system financing. And while we appreciate the billions of dollars for water infrastructure provided over the years, funding for some of these programs are ending, and we need to take steps now in order to protect our water systems. According to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation report, the conservative cost for repairing, replacing, and updating New York's aging and deteriorating wastewater and water infrastructure over the next 20 years is $36.2 billion and $38.7 billion, respectively. More recently, New York State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli estimated that investment is actually upwards of $40 billion for drinking water alone. New York has 11.6% of the documented need nationwide for clean water infrastructure investment, and it has been reported that 30% of the state's wastewater collection systems are beyond their expected useful life. Unfortunately, only 25% of the projects identified as priority are able to be funded in any given year. Some of that funding is provided by the New York State Environmental Facilities Corp, EFC, in the form of low-cost loans. As a way to allocate this money, EFC develops a list, the intended use plan, for annual and multi-year projects deemed necessary in order to meet environmental protection, compliance, and the operation and maintenance costs for both wastewater and drinking water infrastructure. While the list is a representative compilation of pertinent projects, it does not denote all projects within New York that require attention, since not all municipalities seek EFC funding and/or submit all their projects to be listed on the IUP. Funding for water infrastructure should not solely be based on this list. Therefore, we need to update the New York State Clean Water Needs Survey. It's critical in understanding the funding gap. Historical investments have made New York a national leader in water infrastructure funding. As all infrastructure needs continue to grow for local governments, under 10% of the total expenditures have been directed toward water and wastewater infrastructure in the past 10 years. In addition, municipalities are subject to the tax cap constraints a limit on the amount they can tax residents to fund infrastructure improvements. A lack of investment can result in delayed maintenance, which deteriorates existing infrastructure, reduces service life, and more importantly, may increase the cost of future repairs. We suggest that the clean water capital projects be exempt of the tax cap. Besides the normal operation and maintenance of utilities, natural disasters and other crisis situations have adversely impacted New York's water and wastewater infrastructure. These unanticipated costs strain already stressed finances, hinders a municipality's ability to invest in necessary upgrades, and forces deference of necessary repairs. The Safe Water Infrastructure Action Program, SWAP, is designed to provide municipalities with water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure with an annual supplemental funding stream to support operation and maintenance activities. Just like the successful Consolidated Local Street and Highway Improvement Program, CHIPS, this consistent funding will allow municipalities the opportunity to do smaller projects such as equipment replacement, manhole rehabilitation, and water line replacement. Creating a program like this not only provides funding for short-term maintenance, it would also create long-term system stability. We support the bipartisan Safe Water Infrastructure Action Program legislation. In 1966, the Rockefeller Pure Waters Program led the nation in investment of $1 billion towards water infrastructure. Since then, New York has been an example for the entire country with water infrastructure funding, and we know you hope to continue this tradition. A federal infrastructure package was recently passed and signed into law, which will provide significant investment for drinking water and clean water programs. This will enhance the state's present programs to reach a greater number of communities throughout the state. Now is the time and opportunity to close the funding gap and improve our environmental infrastructure for generations to come. New York State has stepped up to the plate in recent years and should continue the positive momentum towards this goal. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and please consider New York Water Environment Association as a resource for you and your staff. And I'll gladly relay any questions you may have, as well as those questions previously that Martin referred to as well, to NIWEA's Government Affairs Committee, which they will be happy to provide you with a thorough response.
Thank you very much. Mr. Daly?
Thank you, Senator. And thank you, Senator. I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you today. As is the honor of being the last person, I'm not going to make a better case than you've heard before about the infrastructure needs in our state. They certainly outweigh the available funding that we have. I'm not even the first Martin to speak to you on this panel about some of those issues, but I will echo my colleagues' note about the limited staffing in Environmental Facilities Corporation, DEC. They really are holding projects up that we have been working on as well. Skip my introduction. My name is Martin Daly. I am the Director of Water Quality Programs for the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. We are a unique entity, but there are others like us in the state, and that we work on issues that extend beyond municipal borders. So economic development, land use planning, water infrastructure. I'm here to talk about one of the success stories that we've been involved in, and hope that you can certainly look to our success story as a way to emulate successful programs, develop programs in the rest of the state that can solve regional issues specifically related to water quality. This area of the Hudson River is colloquially called the Albany Pool, not because we intend to go swimming in it, but because of the way it mixes. The Hudson is an estuary, it's tidal, and so pollutants or combined sewage discharges that enter into the Hudson get generally mixed in that area. The section of the Albany Pool extends from the Federal Dam in Troy, a man-made barrier to the river extending north, all the way down to roughly Skodak Island State Park, about a half an hour from here. In that area of the Hudson River, there are nearly 100 permitted CSO discharges into the river among 6 communities: the cities of Albany, Troy, Rensselaer, Watervliet, Cohoes, and the village of Green Island. So quite a substantial amount of permitted CSO volume is discharged into the Hudson River in that area, roughly 1.2 billion gallons of sewage every year. In the early 2000s, with updated combined sewer overflow permits, those communities were notified that they needed to develop long-term control plans to address water quality in the river, given the fact that they were out of compliance. Here we have one river and 6 communities. And sometimes when communities are working on issues beyond their municipal borders, there tends to be finger pointing about who's responsible, who has to fix it, who has to pay for it. This didn't happen in our case. Our leaders had enormous guts in deciding we have the opportunity to work together on a program that's never been done in New York State by partnering to solve a regional issue. And so those 6 communities came together around the table with a very talented engineering and legal team. They sat down with Department of Environmental Conservation, and they hammered out a joint long-term control plan that created a list of more than 50 projects and programs that would demonstrably bring the communities in compliance with the Clean Water Act. So we're not like Onondaga County, where we're simply going to throw, I don't want to say throw money as it's a bad as if they took the wrong approach, but our program is designed to test for water quality standards in the Hudson River, and we're going to meet those water quality standards as opposed to limiting our CSO discharges. So those communities worked together, they signed an intermunicipal agreement, and they effectively created a funding formula that I think of akin to when you're out at a restaurant and you need to decide who ate what and who's responsible when the bill comes. That's my job. So next time you go out to eat and somebody has to pay the bill, think of me as always having to figure out that bill. Essentially, CDRPC serves as the financial conduit between those communities in assigning the cost of the program. And so no matter where a project is constructed, or no matter who is ultimately constructing it or owning it, the communities have a shared responsibility to pay for it. That goes from Albany, the largest community, paying 58.68%, to the Village of Cohoes paying 0.53%. And that cost of those projects is based on the CSO discharge volume that we've modeled for each of those communities. Albany discharges more CSO into the Hudson. And so what this means is that they're able to not only spread the costs among the communities, but also take advantage of grants and loans that save the communities money. We're not competing. $1 given to Albany is shared by all the communities. $1 given to Troy is shared by all the communities. So we've been able to demonstrate a very effective cost savings to these communities by working collaboratively and looking beyond our municipal borders to address regional water quality issues. We all have Hudson River waterfront. We're all looking to make economic development initiatives happen along that waterfront, and we all know we have engaging infrastructure. That's been made clear in every corner of the state. But here we're looking at the Hudson River. We share that resource, and we're working together to address it. To date, we've invested more than $87 million in our long-term control plan, and we have relied or benefited from more than $40 million of state investment to support our program. So that has significantly benefited the pool communities in the amount of funding that they have to pass on to their local ratepayers, which in older urban communities are often stressed by water and sewer rates, which are traditionally regressive. So we thank you for your support. We just hope that consideration in future legislation provides opportunities for communities to work together when sometimes we've encountered the fact that we're often a square peg in a round hole, in the fact that every project we build is collectively owned or managed. It doesn't sometimes fit these funding packages or programs that are available to us. WQIP, for example, Water Quality Improvement Grants. So we stress that working together has a demonstrated impact of saving communities money, and it will have a demonstrated impact on our natural resources and public health and cleaning up facilities like the Hudson River. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. And yes, all of the testimony will be distributed to everybody who was here and also those who weren't able to make it. So appreciate it, and don't worry, they will all see it. My question is, I guess, a little bit twofold, but on workforce and job development. So both looking forward with the scale of projects that we're talking about and that we know that we need, how many jobs do we think that would create, especially in more upstate, more rural areas? And two, we hear a lot, specifically here in this panel, about understaffing at some of the agencies. What do you think would be needed what kind of staffing increase would be needed to be able to move forward in the way that we want to?
In terms of infrastructure, There was a formula pre-COVID, and I don't know how much that has been upgraded since. And this is something that we were working on a couple of years ago. That says that about 17 jobs are created for every $1 million that is invested in infrastructure. So if we're looking at a $1 billion a year investment, we're looking at about 17,000 roughly new jobs in terms of infrastructure. So in terms of economic development and the ability to employ people, the ability is there. From our perspective, we like to see those numbers, and we like to see a long-term commitment, so that when we take a person in an apprenticeship program that is going to last 4 years, we know that that person is going to be employed for the long term. Because it doesn't do us any good, it doesn't do them any good, and it doesn't do the community in general any good if that person is going to be sitting around the union hall without anything to do. So knowing that the projects are going to be there and there is going to be a long-term commitment, is going to give us the ability to bring in new, younger members to our union in particular, and give them the opportunity to have a long-term career in the business.
I guess my quick follow-up to that before we get to the agency piece is, how long do you think the ramp-up would take, right? If we were to do something the scale in which we're talking about, knowing that not necessarily all of those jobs or people are there to fill those jobs now, how long would that ramp-up take, especially with the apprenticeship program?
Our apprenticeship program is just 4 years, but we allow, and we have the opportunity to make sure that our members go to work on day one. And we use a lot of these projects to give our members hands-on experience from day one. And it also depends. Some of them come with much more skill set and knowledge on construction than some others, but everybody catches up relatively quickly. We offer classes. Local 825 is going to be offering classes this whole winter for all our members to be able to continue their education throughout different programs, particularly in water, sewage, natural gas, and some of the other larger projects that we have. The work that we do is to open up trenches and dig in. So it allows us to give them the ability to do that on a regular basis, and provide with that type of work constantly. But it's just a matter of how consistent the money is going to be there for the long term. And also, if we know that the state of New York is going to be spending X amount of money, and that this is going to be consistent for a period of time, our leadership will have to step up to the plate and say, well, we need to bring in more members. We need to reach out to the community and bring in more members. During the period of 2008 to 2013, we did not have any new apprenticeship classes because the construction economy was not there. And it would have been irresponsible for us to bring in new members for that reason. But if there is a commitment, of course, we will do everything to make sure that the jobs are fulfilled.
I think it's a very important element to the success of this program and getting done these infrastructure improvements that are needed. But our experience has been there's more training required. This is hazardous work. People are working in trenches. You're working around aging gas mains. You're in traffic. There's a lot to it, and you don't just put anybody in a backhoe. You don't just put anybody into the trench, and so I have some concern on the time it's going to take to ramp up. We haven't seen an overabundance of contractors bidding the jobs in upstate New York. Prices reflect that right now, and so I'm fearful that it's going to take a while to ramp up. So we appreciate the commitment. It's going to be a necessary element. Regarding the other issue, the staffing requirements for DOH and DEC, the best approach would be to meet with some key people there. My observation in each of the regional offices, they're probably each at least one person short to do the job that needs to be done. DEC varies from region to region, but the people are really stretched there. Those that can best speak to that need. Maybe NIWE is comfortable in that area, but I would talk to DEC reps and DOH to better quantify that, Senator. So, okay.
Some of the on-the-ground impacts for projects like ours is we're being administered through a consent order. So we have non-negotiable deadlines for things like review of plan and specification. And so the loss of human capital at the agencies reviewing these documents doesn't just create a delay, it puts us in a potential position to violate our orders on consent. We don't have a choice. And we can't come and say, oh, force majeure is not enough staff for you to review a plan. It's equally felt on the funding side, because not only are our plans being reviewed for a compliance side, our plans are being reviewed by a funding side. So there's two agencies, and sometimes they don't communicate, and that can delay the process as well. And they're both struggling with internal staffing requirements. And so the regulators, it's weird to be one of the regulated and say, the regulators need more support, but they do.
Thank you very much. Senator May?
Yeah, very quickly, Mr. Ortega, I was wondering if the operating engineers get training in green infrastructure installation, and is that competing for your jobs? How does that look in the workforce?
We do everything. We do every single aspect of infrastructure, and our members have the capacity to do that. And we're always looking for new training that it may be needed for both for new apprentices coming in, as well as our current members who are part of our workforce. And we're always encouraging our members to continue their different education and the different updates on things that are happening. And we're ready and able to do the job with the manpower that we have. I think that this is a matter of what are the procedures that, if there is anything new, I can tell you about, for example, in terms of windmills. There's a couple of things that, we're trying to have our instructors learn new things so that they can pass that knowledge along to our members. But there is a lot of nuances on that type of technology, which it's new, but we have the capacity.
Sure.
For example, when the Tappan Zee Bridge was being built, there's a brand new crane that came in that the big, our members were able to do the work because they have the capacity they have the knowledge to do the type of job that it was needed. Our members do need to have a certain level of experience and knowledge on what's happening, but we're certain that we're capable of doing the type of work that is needed.
Thank you.
One thing I'd like to say too is that while we've addressed a lot of the infrastructure of the pipes in the ground, the facilities themselves, there's also the infrastructure of our operators. What we're seeing is we have a lot of aging out of our operators. So to try to find the workforce to do what we do in the wastewater treatment facilities, with as much training as needed to operate one of the facilities, funding in that area certainly would help as well to get operators trained and to find a way of encouraging more people to get into this industry.
Based on Tim's testimony earlier, I just wanted to point out, I think it's pretty well spelled out in the written testimony, but as far as the IUP list and the validity of that list, if that's going to be a huge determinant in which projects get funded, sorely needs to be updated, and it has to be more reflective of the current needs. So we've made the point, Tim made it admirably, but just want to make sure that point is captured. Okay?
What's the IUB list?
The intended use plan, that's both at the state Senator, I'm trying to think, Schumer's office was, when the infrastructure bills were being talked about, his aides were coming around asking if we had projects on the IUP list in a state of readiness. And the answer was largely no, because the projects that were most needed based on today's needs never scored highly enough or never were applied for because they just didn't meet the old criteria. So the list had a few projects maybe that were still representative of current needs, but it's way out of date. And the other thing is you put the programs in place as we move into this. I encourage it to be looked at regularly and modified, because just within the last year, climate change, we've had significant flooding events here in New York State that we've never seen. We've had these emerging contaminants scare the heck out of me because we're dealing with what we know now, but every year we're digging deeper into the presence that our forefathers left us, and we need to have a nimble program that can move as the needs change. So we'd like to help with that, as we see things changing. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Tedesco.
Yeah, quickly, we've had a long morning and getting into the afternoon, so very quickly, in relationship to the point you made about regionalism, I mean, earlier on today, I spoke about the fact that there's not a senator or an assembly person that hasn't been contacted by a municipality about the sub-level infrastructure, or, you know, safe water, sewer, the lines that are below the roads and bridges, which we seem to concentrate on. And I see you mentioned in that Rensselaer a couple times. You probably remember, not too long ago, Rensselaer had a huge water break. It impacted Half Moon. It impacted, I believe, Waterford in Saratoga County. So we're in this all together. And I think everybody has to understand, it may not be your municipality, you may not have autonomy over it, but when the break takes place, sometimes it affects those who are connected right next to you. And that had a profound impact, that break. I don't know if you remember that. It was huge.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get water into Saratoga in parts of it from Rensselaer. It just happened to be connected in some way. So that's a point well taken, and we should remember to try to work regionally as best we can together to consolidate our concerns. But thank you for that point.
Agree. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for coming today and sticking with us and for your testimony. Again, it will be distributed to everyone who was here and everyone who couldn't make it as well. And I want to thank everyone who came, and senators, thank you too for staying, sticking it through with us. This is a really important issue, as we all know, especially Senator May as chair of the Rural Resources Task Force, or Commission, I should say, something that we really have to be paying a lot more attention to, and I think this is a really opportune moment to do that, especially in partnership and with the synergy from the federal government, making sure that New York is really addressing the needs that we have here in the state, as well as how that impacts not just our cities, but also our more rural areas who often have the infrastructure that is 200, 100 years old. So really appreciate all of you being here today, everyone who was able to come through. And, you know, this is something that I know we are prioritizing and will continue to do so and to work with our colleagues. Anything you'd like to?
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.